A battle in the heart of Alabama caught our attention. Coal miners in one community, they've been on strike now for months.
Working as long as 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in some of the most dangerous conditions.
I really think that the labor movement is the single greatest force for democracy in the history of the United States.
The story of Alabama is a story of not just resilience, but of militancy.
I say no contract, you say no code. No contract, no contract.
If we ain't all free, ain't none of us free.
You're listening to Alabama's only union talk radio show, The Valley Labor Report, with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
Hello, Tennessee Valley. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator Adam Keller, and we are broadcasting live, online, and on the radio from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio Studio in Huntsville, Alabama. Not a lot of folks know that, but we're right here, the Spice Radio Studio specifically, the heart of the Tennessee Valley. Today, in conversation, a University of Alabama college worker and a Rutgers lecturer about college unions and the Rutgers strike. An Alabama paper mill lied to OSHA about a worker's death and tried to cover it up. Warren Tidwell talks to us about recovery efforts in Camp Hill, Alabama. All that and more on today's Valley Labor Report. If you want to be part of the program today, we've got a phone number. The line is not open, but you can send us a text message. You can send us a text message at 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. And we can respond on the air. You can also leave a voicemail or send us a text message throughout the week. We're going to be responding to a text message that we got during the week last week in our first story. If you haven't gotten enough of us by the time that we wrap up here on the radio, or if you just want to see what we're up to throughout the week, then you gotta follow us online, folks. In particular, TVLR.fm. That's right. Bookmark that tab, TVLR.fm. You will see new content almost every single day. Write-ups of our clips and original reporting as well. So make sure you bookmark that, TVLR.fm, and sign up for our newsletter at tvlr.fm/contact in the notes form. Tell us if you want the daily newsletter or the weekly newsletter. We send those out every day and every week, so you just let us know how much we want to bug you, and we will happily oblige. If you want to become a sustaining donor for the program to help us keep going, remember our largest single source of funding comes directly from our listeners, then you can do that at tvlr.fm/donate. You can set it up to make a recurring donation automatically, or you can send us a one-time donation as well. tvlr.fm/donate. You can also become a patron at patreon.com/thevalleylaborreport. If you are, if you're on Patreon and you have, that's where you like to get your content, then you can sign up there. And, special benefit for patrons is you can listen to the show free of commercials. Totally free of commercials. There are no commercials in the Patreon feed. So, that's an added benefit. You can also buy our merch from our store, tvlr.fm/store. We are out of our hats. Totally out. I just mailed out the last one yesterday. The last hat. We've got no more hats, but we have stickers, we have shirts, and that's about it. We've got stickers and shirts. tvlr.fm/store. And if you're a member of a union, then definitely think about getting your local to sponsor the show. You can reach out to me for more details on that. We could not do the show without our local sponsors.
Absolutely. We truly appreciate all of them. Let me add a disclaimer that any viewpoints or opinions expressed in this program belong solely to their author and do not necessarily represent any organization or sponsor. We welcome all of our listeners, whether you are on YouTube, Facebook, WVNN, WZZA, WHIV, or through your favorite podcast app. We are proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network and encourage our listeners to check it out. We believe that Alabama and the South's labor movement and working class deserve a bigger platform. We're hoping this project can make a difference on that front, and we could not do it without you. We want to thank everyone for tuning in. Whether you're a loyal fan or a first-time listener, we appreciate you spending some time with us this morning.
Absolutely. Checking out the chat. Appreciate everybody that is hanging out with us this morning. We have, I'm not sure if we're live on Facebook yet, but we have Alex and Infinite Content in the YouTube chat, per usual. Alex, very sorry that you lost your job on Thursday, but you said that you're going to start looking for another job at the beginning of May, so I hope you enjoy the time off. And yeah, there are definitely jobs available at the Postal Service, UPS, and if you become a UPS employee, you'll be able to take part in a historic strike potentially in August. Yeah, hopefully you're able to hook up with one of these good-paying union jobs that are coming open.
Absolutely.
Infinite Content mentions a situation evolving at U of Michigan, and look at Adam giving out the legal disclaimer. That's right. That's right. It's not so much a legal disclaimer exactly, but just because we do have a variety of sponsors and advertisers, and not everything that we say. I mean, everything that we say. Our sponsors should agree with all of it because it's always correct, right? But it's not always going to be the
just
case.
on the off chance.
Just on the off chance that one of our sponsors happen to be wrong about something, we're letting people know that we're not carbon copies of all of our sponsors, and we appreciate them. And it takes all kinds, and we're happy to work with a diverse with people of diverse viewpoints.
Absolutely.
Have you seen the situation evolving at U of Michigan? I have not been following it very closely. I have to admit, I have been ridiculously busy, but I have been following the situation at Rutgers a little bit more closely, and so very excited to bring you this conversation. Where else, other than the Valley Labor Report, are you going to hear a college worker from Alabama, a union college worker from Alabama, talking to another college worker after successful, I think rightfully described as a successful strike? Nowhere else are you going to hear that conversation besides the Valley Labor Report, so we're excited for that. But first, we're going to talk about this crazy story, and I think Infinite Content maybe was the first one to flag it for us on Twitter, but also Jack from New Jersey sent us a text on the text line, 844-899-TVLR, 844-899-8857. And oh wait, no, it wasn't him. Who sent it to us then? Because he said something. Jack from New Jersey was talking about the Rutgers strike. Who sent this in? I don't know. Maybe it was an email. Now I'm not sure. But somebody sent us a message about the about this paper mill worker death, and they asked, "Did you hear about this paper mill worker who died of electrocution at work last year?" The company, this is coming from our listener, the company tried to lie about the cause of death. Business Insider just came out with a story about it yesterday, April 14th. "I work in manufacturing, and the details of how unsafe this workplace is are really scary. OSHA proposed $227,000 in fines. Thanks for your work. Thanks for listening." And so let's check out this Business Insider reporting, because it is wild. It's absolutely crazy. And so the bottom line is that a paper mill worker in Alabama, and not a greenhorn either. This is not somebody who just came in out of high school, didn't know what the hell they were doing, and screwed some stuff up, right? This was a 12-year veteran of the company. Been working there 12 years. Knows his stuff, this guy. And he died because he was electrocuted because a supervisor did not lock out and tag out the machine. And then, after he was electrocuted, the company reported to OSHA that this guy, he just had a heart attack. It wasn't related to our unsafe working conditions. He just had a heart attack. That's what they told OSHA. And then the machine did not have a lockout tagout sign when the incident occurred. But then after the incident, they put up a lockout tagout sign on the machine and took a picture of that and sent it to the police department. Just bald-faced lying about a worker's death. I mean, this guy died because their boss screwed stuff up. And then, on top of that, they tried to cover it up. They tried to cover it up and just make it out like this guy, he just had a heart attack. He just had a heart attack. And so the coroner said, no, this doesn't look like just a normal everyday heart attack. This guy was electrocuted, actually. And so the coroner reported that to OSHA. And then get this, the company's lawyer calls the coroner and says, hey, would you care to lie for us on your form and say that, no, actually, I got it wrong. He wasn't electrocuted. It was actually just a regular heart attack. Just insane. I mean, just vile, evil stuff here from the company. South Coast Paper LLC. South Coast Paper LLC. I mean, just really, really crazy stuff. And so, reading from this Business Insider piece, according to a report by the DOL's Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, the company reported the incident as a heart attack and asked the local coroner's office to not list electrocution as the cause of death. And this is another thing that's just a kind of a sidebar. But coroners are elected, which is the craziest thing in the world. And so you could imagine a situation where this goes a different way because the coroner's campaign was funded by South Coast Paper LLC.
Right.
Just
absolutely.
Just the most bizarre thing in the world that coroners are elected positions. But that's the case. That's the case. The plant's manager and company general manager told an OSHA certified health and safety officer that the worker had died from electrocution, but the company had already written witness statements listing the cause of death as electrocution. But they went back and they were saying the company, the big corporate entity was trying to say like, no, that's not it. OSHA said
awful.
OSHA said that the electrocution happened when the employee who had been at the company 12 years was working on the line of a sheeter machine with two other workers when they alerted the night shift supervisor that something was wrong with the conveyor's motor. The supervisor decided to replace the motor but did not lock out or tag out any of the equipment in the process, and when the employee grabbed a metal rail connected to the conveyor system, he was shocked by the electricity. CPR was administered, but he was pronounced dead on site. Lockout devices are placed on energy isolating devices to hold them in a safe mode and to prevent the equipment from being controlled, while tag-out devices indicate that the equipment can't be used. OSHA wrote in its report that the supervisor had not had any formal or on-the-job electrical or lockout and tag-out training and, quote, had minimal knowledge of electrical practices.
Wow.
And this is another issue about management not coming from the line. The idea that you can be a manager in a manufacturing environment and have zero formal or on-the-job electrical training? That's wild. That's wild stuff here. OSHA said that a local police chief had been informed that tampering of the site was done before and after they had left. This included cleaning out the area where the motor was located and adding a lockout-tagout sign to the machine. Lockout-tagout was not done for the machine, but was in place when pictures were given to the police department, OSHA wrote in a report.
They knew they did wrong, and they tried to cover it up, and that's just despicable.
South Coast Paper, quote, does not have energy control procedures in place, and no locks or tags are available to maintenance employees, other than two personal locks that one worker brought from his previous employer. Holy crap. OSHA proposed $227,000 in penalties. It noted that also in 2021, OSHA had inspected South Coast Paper's facility in Burlington, New Jersey, after an employee had lost 3 fingers while servicing a machine and had issued a citation to the company related to its energy control procedures. Just terrible stuff here, and no reason for it. No reason for it at all. Alex says, I'm in tech, so I'm blessed to have opportunity. That said very, very few unions. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, this is just really, really, really gross stuff. Pittsburgh Dude 87 mentions that if coroners were appointed, corruption could still enter the process. Not sure how we could fix it under the current system. I think that probably appointments would be maybe less subject to corruption, but
I don't know about that. I think either way, it really just depends on how engaged the community is, and is anyone actually paying attention? Because frankly, you're not prone to pay attention to what the coroner's doing, right? That's not a high profile position. So, but this is a good case of where it could really be relevant. Yeah, for sure. So, wild story, really gross stuff. But that's what bosses do. That's what companies do, right? That's why it's important to be organized against this kind of stuff, because they're going to run wild if you allow them. So we're going to take a break really quick, and we're going to be back with this conversation between a Rutgers striker, they just came off strike last week, and a UA college worker, member of the United Campus Workers, CWA. So we'll be right back with this conversation. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report.
IBW 558 is like a great football team. You've got to have the aptitude, skills, and knowledge to outperform the competition. If you're a non-union electrician, now is the perfect time to get off the sideline and join our team. We have the absolute best wages and benefit package in North Alabama and Southern Tennessee. It's because our team stands together, bargains together, and our families benefit from it. With immediate openings, you have the opportunity to see why the IBW is the right choice.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Support for this program comes from the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 136, out of Central Alabama. Learn more at ibew136.org.
Attention union members, membership organizations, podcasters, or anyone with a payment processing need. The future is here, and your organization needs to be prepared by working with Unionly. With Unionly, your union or organization can take payments on a mobile device, eliminating processing fees, giving you a better price than other payment processing methods, while at the same time supporting a union-friendly business with a specialized skill set to meet your needs. Your members will thank you when they pay their dues at their convenience without waiting in line to deposit cash or check. Start preparing for the future today by calling 206-595-8631 or visiting unionly.io.
Are you looking for a better future, a career that can have you set for life, and to be a part of something that's bigger than yourself? If you are, then consider a skilled trades apprenticeship with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. The work of IUPAT is all around us, from the industrial painters who work on the bridges to drywall finishers, floor coverers, the glazers who install the glass in our skylines, and so much more. With an IUPAT apprenticeship, you earn while you learn and receive benefits while learning the trade, including a pension. We provide world-class education free of charge. That's right, no student debt. Our starting salaries for apprentices that graduate is above the national median salary with benefits for entire families. And you have the flexibility to take your trade wherever you'd like in the country to work. IUPAT District Council 77 covers our entire region, so give Adam Booth a call at 205-603-3142 for more information. Again, that phone number is 205-603-3142. Come build a better future with us today and join IUPAT.
The sign hit the city like a bolt of lightning.
You know the photo. It's iconic. Marches in the streets holding a simple sign with a simple message.
I am a man.
The I Am Story podcast explores the fight that inspired those words, how a group of sanitation workers in Memphis stood up and made history.
They don't see us as men and women.
Go to iamstory.com or wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. to dwell.
Labor creates all wealth. All wealth should go to labor, and you are listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. We've got a text message line open. You can call, you can send us a text message at 844-899-TVLR, 844-899-8857 if you want to get in on the show. So we had some chatter in the Facebook chat from Amy saying, hearing that a paper mill lied, can't believe that, with an obvious hint of sarcasm there. Speaking of paper mills, my first bit of reporting on the J Main paper mill closure is out, both in These Times and the Real News Network. You can check that out at therealnews.com or In These Times mag.com. In These Times, Google In These Times, Google the Real News Network, and both of them are on the front pages of the websites right now.
Good job, Jacob.
So yeah, it was I appreciate it. Happy about that. We've got some more stuff coming. We're going to be having a podcast come from some of the conversations that I had, as well as a longer piece about it. So but this is kind of just kind of to introduce you to the situation there. And I appreciated them giving me the opportunity to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was really cool. So, so I'm going to read this from Jack from New Jersey, because it's relevant for this portion of the show. Hey, Jake and Adam, it's Jack from New Jersey. I wanted to share some labor organizing news from around here. For the past week, this was sent 6 days ago, staff and faculty at Rutgers University were on strike, the largest public sector strike in state history. They have been without a contract since June and face the university president lying that public sector strikes are illegal in New Jersey. Demands included substantial wage increases, health insurance for adjuncts, adjunct pay proportional to full-time non-tenured lecturers instead of this two-tier nonsense, increased graduate student pay, and much more. I had the privilege of spending my afternoon Saturday supporting the pickets at the Newark campus, and the solidarity of tenure staff, students, and community for striking workers was truly inspiring. At about 1:30 a.m., Governor Murphy, union officials, and the university announced a tentative agreement. It was actually a tentative framework, not a tentative agreement, but though rank-and-file union members emphasized that the strike is suspended, not over, conditional on follow-through with the contract. Like all workers, they play an important part in my community, and I hope they all get the contract they deserve. So that is well said, Jack from New Jersey. And here to talk about that with us, we have Hank Calais, a part-time lecturer at Rutgers University, and John Gilmer, a college worker at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa, and a member of the United Campus Workers, CWA, the union representing college workers here in Alabama. Hank, John, thank you so much for taking the time to join us this morning.
No problem. No problem. We at Rutgers appreciate the opportunity to kind of fill you in on where things stand and how we got to the point that we're on. I'll just a real quick correction. It's Calais, not Calais.
Calais.
It looks that way, but this is it's Calais. So.
Appreciate the correction. Duly noted. And so, Hank, yes. Really appreciate your time on the show. And so let's we'll go with introductions, and we'll start with John. And John, talk to us about what you do for the University of Alabama, your involvement in the union, and also maybe explain a bit for listeners some of the differences in public sector collective bargaining laws for Alabama and some of the broad strokes of differences between Alabama and New Jersey, and Hank can kind of fill in the details on the New Jersey specifics. But John, talk to us about that.
Absolutely. So I serve in student life here on staff at the University of Alabama. So I'm the assistant director of student involvement, and that means I spend a great deal of time working with our student organizations. So I just work at the intersection of university policy and the student organization. So it does put me in a good position to learn a lot about the inner workings of the university and how it's affecting students and staff and faculty. So I've been here as a member of the United Campus Workers Alabama chapter for about 2 years, and I've been engaged as a campus fellow too, trying to work in a really intentional way to grow our membership. One thing to answer your question in general about organizing in Alabama, of course, we're a right to work state, and it is essentially not a possibility for us to acquire a contract. So our objectives are broadly similar in that we are advocating and rallying for better healthcare, better compensation, sort of institutional respect for our most vulnerable workers, but we don't have the opportunity to agitate towards something like a contract. However, that's not to say that our work can't end up with similar outcomes, but that we don't have that structure, that specific focus in our advocacy and our organizing on campus.
And so so I guess just spend a little bit of time explaining, why you would then be involved in a union if you don't have this formalized process, government-sanctioned process for an election and contract negotiations. Because even some union members, they're like, well, if I can't do this government-sanctioned collective bargaining, if I can't have, government seal of approval through an election process, then what's the point of being in a union? Can you even be in a union? Are you really a union? All of those kind of questions come to mind.
Yeah, well, we are workers here on campus, and I think that's where our power comes from, is in our solidarity. And so I think that what I've been encouraged by is we're mostly faculty, but I am one of the maybe 10% of us are staff, and we have a lot of grad students. And I think one thing that I'm emerging that's been seeing that emerge, it's encouraging, is that folks are realizing that even without that end goal of a contract, we're still able to influence conversations, to leverage our power collectively in gathering on campus, being seen on campus, and organizing in that way. So I think that even without a contract, it's still something that we have the powers and the workers at the very base here. And I think the university, as it's starting to realize, just completely losing control of its staff in particular. They had what's called a chime-in survey. It's sort of a cute reference to Denny Chimes, the bell tower here. And about 80% of staff who were surveyed felt they were poorly compensated. So the university right now is in a position where it needs has to reckon with its workers. And so I think even without a contract, we're fired up and we're encouraged by this moment and are trying to do our best to take advantage of it. One thing, though, I will mention, though, is that you're right. It is a challenge. I think we're not in a state where unions are well understood. In fact, they're fairly rare. And so I think that a conversation starter in New Jersey about unions may be very, very different from one in Alabama, where folks will say things like, I didn't even know we had a union, or I didn't know we could unionize. So I think that messaging is more complicated in a state like Alabama.
Right. I've even had people say that I thought unions were illegal in Alabama. I've had people come up to me and say, oh, I didn't know you could be in a union. I thought that was illegal, which is just wild. But, some people have that understanding of things. So, Hank, let's go to you and explain to us, by way of introduction, what you do at Rutgers and the union that you're a part of, and maybe some of the differences in public sector collective bargaining laws in New Jersey.
Yeah, so I am a member of the executive board of the adjunct faculty union at Rutgers. Technically, at Rutgers, we're called part-time lecturers, but we've been pushing hard to change the name, just because we want to make it clear that we're integral to the way the university operates. That the university, in the contemporary era that we're in, the use of adjuncts has changed dramatically. We're now central to the way education is provided across the country. So I'm on the executive board of the adjunct union. There are three faculty unions, all three of which voted to strike. One of them represents a lot of clinicians, doctors at the medical school and in the hospitals that are affiliated with Rutgers. So they were not in the same position to walk out as we were, because they had patients. So a lot of them had to stay on. They would come out during their lunch hours and march with us during the picketing. So there are three faculty unions. There are 12 other unions, I believe, at Rutgers, and we've organized a large coalition. We call it CREW, the Coalition of Rutgers Unions. Very creative, right? So we were agitating across campus, across our three major campuses, and we are in a very different position, I think, than you guys are down in Alabama. Rutgers, in its state constitution, recognizes the right of unions to organize and to represent workers. State workers, public workers are in a slightly different position. While there's no law that prevents us from organizing, obviously, we've had we've had multiple unions at Rutgers for going on 40 years, 50 years. Excuse me. There is some common law on the books tied to a lot of the protests of the late 60s. And this, at that time, Rutgers was a much more conservative state. Rutgers. Now, New Jersey was a much more conservative state than it is now. And the courts ruled at that time that public worker strikes, while not against the law, were not necessarily protected. They imposed injunctions at that time. And what's happened over the years is that most public worker strikes in New Jersey have been among K-12 school teachers. And the courts have generally ruled, issued injunctions preventing them from staying out and finding them and doing that. So that's kind of what the case law looks like. We felt and still feel that striking is legal. There's nothing on the books that says that it shouldn't be. Rutgers would have had to have made the case that we were disrupting the business of the state. And that's kind of what unions are supposed to do anyway. So
right. And so that was part of the that was part of the thing that they did, saying that that they lied and said that public sector strikes are just carte blanche illegal, and that's and like you said, that's not exactly the case. There's no law specifically prohibiting it, but they're not protected in the same way that maybe private sector strikes would be. And so you got to go to the courts and get the courts to do an injunction, and Rutgers simply had not done that yet, and so therefore the strike was not illegal at the outset.
Right. So when we voted. We had an extensive process. We began, or we've been organizing since before the end of the contract in some ways or another. But once the contract expired, we ramped up our organizing, and we had massive support amongst all of the job categories that were involved with the strike. So each of the three unions had majority votes, and that ended up being, I think, like our vote for the adjunct faculty. We had something like 55 or 60% vote. 95% of our members voted to strike. Numbers were similar for the full-timers, but we shorthand them as the full-timers. There's a union that represents the tenured and tenure line faculty, the non-tenured faculty who are contingent in different ways than we are, and the grad students. They're in one union, and there are a couple of other job categories, I think, in their postdocs and a couple of others. There's our union, which represents the adjuncts, and then there's the medical union. So all three of those unions had similar numbers when we voted to authorize the strike. We gave Rutgers really 3 weeks to continue bargaining before we actually voted to walk out. And on the eve of the walkout, with the potential that Holloway, our president, Jonathan Holloway, would seek out an injunction, the governor stepped in.
That's all just really, really great stuff that you were able to get so much support for this kind of thing, because striking is really difficult, and we're going to get a little bit more into that, but before we do, continuing with some of some personal introductions and stuff. I've read some of your pieces on your Substack, and you're a part-time lecturer in journalism, and
yes.
And you mentioned about the kind of conflicting sense of self, I guess, because typically you're on the other side of a microphone interviewing someone, or the other side of the table interviewing someone trying to get their story, and now people are trying to get your story. So, talk to us about that tension and kind of, I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
It is a little surreal for me. like you said, I am used to, I'm still actually, I'm more freelance now. I do a lot less writing for publications. But I have my history is as an editor and reporter on at local newspapers in New Jersey, and for state websites in New Jersey, reaching out, calling public officials, talking to people on the picket line when there are strikes, doing all of that. I'm used to getting the information from them, the stories from them, and trying to tell their stories. Now I'm in front of the camera, with a microphone being put in front of my face. It's unbelievably surreal. And I told my students when we came back into the classroom this past week that in some respects, as a journalist, I wish that this experience being the one having to answer questions, I wish I had had that when I started my career, because it's given me kind of insight on what it's like to have to field questions on the spot, and it's given me a little bit. Probably, I always think of myself as being empathetic anyway, but I think I have a little bit more empathy for the person that I'm sticking my tape recorder in their face, right? So that's been interesting, and it was a crash course for me. I've been working on the media structure for our union for going on 2 years, but I haven't been in the spokesman position, and because I was on the line, a lot of our other executive board members were in negotiations, so they were like behind locked doors for 12, 14 hours a day. Because I was on the line, and I kind of tasked myself with kind of playing free safety out there. I was kind of like troubleshooting. I didn't have a picket captain role or anything like that. So I was doing some troubleshooting, and I was kind of interceding, trying to make sure that the press had comment, and one talking to me, and then making sure that members had an opportunity to put the word out as well. It's been different for me, definitely. Not what I'm used to. Not what I'm used to doing. I'm used to being on the other side, like you said.
For sure, and I think that some of that having that empathy, I think is really key for journalists. There's a certain sense where you do want a journalist to be kind of a view from above, and I'm not super interested in a journalist being empathetic maybe to politicians or people in power and things like this, right? But I do wonder if the kind of proletarianization of the media is part of the reason why maybe we're starting to see more sympathetic coverage of workers' issues, right? Because if you look at some of the things, and obviously there's still a lot of crazy stuff out there about how the rail strike would have cost $2 billion a day, and that's bad, and so therefore Congress should stop them from doing that. But there was a lot of really sympathetic coverage where that wasn't really the case, right? In the 90s or early 2000s or the 80s, there was a lot of the media just firmly kind of took the side of the boss. It seems to me is my reading of the history.
I think that's been the history in recent years. I think we're just at the beginning, though, of this kind of move, maybe back to sympathetic labor coverage. I don't think that we're seeing a lot of it like on like the major networks, right? If we look at the kind of the legacy media, I don't think that we have that the coverage of the rail strike, for instance, or the academic strikes have been as positive as they could be. A lot of that coverage, I think it lacked nuance. So if you were to ask people, when you ask an average person out in the community, why would somebody go on strike? Why is there, my dad, for instance, he's like, why are you guys going on strike? You just want money? Right. And well, yeah, we all wanted raises, of course, but the lack of nuance in a lot of the coverage has meant that, for instance, with the rail strike, the real issue being that scheduling and sick time, that was like central. It got short shrift, and like you said, we ended up with politicians talking about how it would disrupt the economy, but not asking what the lives of these rail workers were like, and what dangers the scheduling and lack of sick time might pose to the communities around where the rails are. And then, in short shrift, we end up with East Palestine. So, I don't want to make it seem like it's a direct link, but there are connections with that.
Well, and I think that question is a really good place to start digging into this situation at Rutgers. Why did you go on strike? What were the issues about?
Each of the academic unions had different specific needs when we walked out. So for the adjuncts, we boiled our we had three major demands: equal pay, pay equity. That meant that we wanted to be paid on the same scale as the non-tenure track full-timers. Right now, we before the strike, we'll say, before all of this organizing, we were probably paid at 60% of what they were paid for doing similar work. Right? They're doing it full time. We're not asking if they're making $90,000 a year. We're not asking for $90,000. But if we work half as much as they do, we want to be paid, about half what they get. So
seems reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, you would think that equal pay is enshrined in law, right? We have the Civil Rights Act. One of my colleagues in our union is a labor historian, and as he said, I mean, the idea of pay equity was central to the Civil Rights Movement and the Civil Rights Act. So we've kind of we've been having this conversation about pay equity in a lot of ways for a long time, but the capitalist system doesn't seem to be too interested in the capitalist system right now is looking to kind of push pay down across the board and create pay equity that way. We want to raise everybody up. So that was one element of it. Another element was job security. We are rehired semester to semester. So I could teach 2 classes in the fall, but not know if I'm coming back in the spring or the next fall. And that wreaks havoc with a lot of people's lives. If you are, especially if you're a younger adjunct, a lot of younger adjuncts are people who are trying to get into academia and are unable to find full-time work. Many of them have kids. If you're working on a semester-to-semester basis, getting childcare becomes a nightmare. Planning those kinds of things out becomes a nightmare. And so we want job security. We want to know that we're going to be back, especially if we've proven ourselves. So I'm just finishing up my 10th year as an adjunct at Rutgers. I'm lucky that our journalism department is run by really conscientious pro-labor people. So I know that they're going to say, okay, you're coming back. I'm coming back. I'm not really worried about it. But not every one of the departments at Rutgers operates the way that my journalism department runs. And many of those people are, they get their appointment letters late. They get their offers late. They just don't know what's going to happen from semester to semester. So we want to change that. We want longer term appointments. We want that to be accelerating. So the longer you're here, the less you have, less uncertainty you face. And the last major point was healthcare. We as adjuncts don't have access to healthcare. We're excluded from all the plans, and we want to see that change. The graduate students are looking for guaranteed funding. It differs department. I learned a lot about how universities operate during this stretch of organizing. But grad workers are appointed on some get 1 year appointments, some get 2, but most of them, when they enter a program, they're looking at the likelihood of having to spend 4 or 5 years doing their research so that they can write their dissertation. I mean, that's why they're there. The research is is not just for them. It's something that helps the university. It'll be published by the university. It'll be housed at the university's libraries. Often the research is done in conjunction with full-time faculty at Rutgers. And so they need more stable, guaranteed funding that's centralized, so that there's again, it comes down to this idea of some level of certainty, so that they know for the life of their time at Rutgers, they will have the ability to complete their degree. They don't have to worry that that they'll be cut loose or that there won't be work for them. Full-timers were looking for more control over scheduling. Rutgers automated its scheduling system, and it's been really difficult. Courses get dropped, courses get changed. Scheduling patterns that may have been in place for years get upended. And so the full-timers are they're very concerned about that. The non-tenure track faculty wanted job security. They wanted a potential path maybe to tenure. And then the medical folks are looking for wage increases that put them in line with other people around the country who do what they do. And they are the medical union is a kind of a legacy union. They came in. Rutgers Medical School is relatively new. There was a state medical school for years, and there were some corruption issues, and so the state had stepped in, forced a merger of the medical school with Rutgers, and so now these medical workers and medical teachers are part of the Rutgers community.
Gotcha.
And there's a debate that I'll be honest, I don't fully understand about detenuring and kind of remaking what's going on over there. They want the protections that they deserve for their jobs, and and that's just three of the unions. Other unions, there's another union that is in the process of a strike pledge, and that's the university's. It's called the Union of Rutgers Administrators, which I think they do this. They probably do similar things to what you're talking about, John. Right? So they're without them, the university would collapse. They order the food, they run the dining halls, they manage the bus system, they schedule the classes, they do they field requests for diplomas. They do all of that. They do it behind the scenes, and nobody ever thinks about what they do. So they're now they're much closer to a potential strike. So that's kind of it's kind of the layout of where we are.
And the result of the strike was that there's what the bargaining committee has called a tentative framework. But the tentative framework, still not a tentative agreement, which is what typically ends strikes, but the strike hasn't been ended. It's suspended, and based on the assumption that they will be getting a tentative agreement. But this tentative framework lays out a lot of wins in these areas. So can you talk to us, you mentioned in one of your pieces that, it's not exactly everything that you wanted, but it's a lot. And so, what did you win? Where were y'all wanting to go further? And then I guess something that I'm interested in as somebody who's never been in a strike, as a federal employee, I wonder, how do you balance the pragmatic kind of stuff? Like, okay, it's fine that we didn't get everything that we wanted here because we got a lot of stuff, versus, are we leaving part of our membership out to dry for the benefit of are we allowing the boss to kind of crack us up in some way? So walk us through those things. What did you win? Where are you wanting to? Where were y'all wanting to go a little bit further? And then how do you weigh these things?
Right. The fact that there are three unions doing the negotiations has complicated things. I mean, we had to build a coalition. That one of the things that we did when we just before we started this is we attempted to merge the three unions into one big faculty union, which I still think would have strengthened our hand even more than where we were, because it would have made it impossible to peel people off. Right. That's always that's always where management wants to go. Let's get a deal with this group, and they'll like it, so the other group won't get anything. And that's a real difficult thing to navigate because, we have a responsibility directly to our individual members for each of these unions. So, and there's a legal issue with, if we get a TA, let's say one of the unions gets a TA, they have a responsibility to put it out to a vote of their membership. And if they don't, if they try to drag their heels, there are some potential legal ramifications for that. Because we're not allowed technically to go on strike for the other unions. So we went out on strike together, understanding the potential pitfalls that we would face. So the full-time union won some significant changes in scheduling. There's going to be a lot of it is being handled through like new committees that are being created, but there is something that's going to be put in place to deal with the scheduling issue. They won raises for all of their members. There are still some significant stuff that has to be hashed out about, in particular about graduate student needs. There's some language in the framework around the length of their funding and the recognition of a class of graduate student. It's called a grad fellow. What happens is that one semester they might be a graduate worker. The next semester they may be functioning primarily as a student doing research. And when they move from graduate assistant to grad fellow, they drop out of the union. They lose their health insurance. And they work, they're working on research that's going to benefit the university. They then go back to doing, let's say, the next semester, the next year, doing graduate assistant work or TA work, and they get pulled back into the union. So their healthcare is on, it's off, it's on, it's off, and again, as you can imagine, it creates some amazing difficulties in their lives. So there's some language in there that's supposed to address that, but not all the grad students at this point are happy. They think a little bit more needs to be done at the very least. For us as part-time people, as adjuncts, the framework has calls for us to get significant raises. In the first year, we're looking at 30 some odd percent. And depending on that's for faculty that stays at the same level. So it could be as much as 45% if you are somebody who gets the upfront raise and then gets a bump tied to a change in status. So I'm technically what's called a part-time lecturer 2. Under the new contract, and one of the things that we're still trying to iron out is where I would like somebody like me would fall. I could move up to, let's say, a part-time lecturer, or what we're hoping will be called an adjunct lecturer, or I think it's just a lecturer, lecturer 3 or lecturer 4, and that would include bumps in money as well. So some of our members could see, 40% increases that first year. Some of them will see less, but the pay structure is going to be we're not going to be at the beginning. We won't be where the non-tenure track faculty are. By the end, we'll be close to where they are. They'll be getting their raises. So we'll still be a little behind, but it'll be much closer. And that money is going to be a game changer for so many people who are teaching on this part-time level.
Right. And John had mentioned to me this morning that that y'all had actually gotten retroactive pay actually for the time of the strike as well, which is really impressive and
right.
important for your members. And and so John, as a college worker in Alabama, I'm interested in some of your thoughts about this situation and what it means for what it means for your members and your organizing, and if there's anything that you'd be interested in asking Hank.
Absolutely. And Hank, y'all's accomplishment has really been extremely encouraging to us down here. I think seeing the ways in which essentially what you're sharing is that resonates with me, because so many of our members and so many of the folks we talk to as we canvass on campus are sharing the exact same concerns and are experiencing the exact same problems of, the complete lack of access for healthcare for our part-time temporary instructors, for folks who do have access to healthcare, especially we talked a lot to our custodial staff. We're seeing folks who do not have have not received any training on or guidance on how to use their FSA or HSA accounts, and have heard about during the transition from technical vendors for those accounts, people losing access to their FSAs, their money just rolls over and is gone. So I think seeing what y'all have accomplished is not just an encouragement, it's also a plan for us. We're still at the very early stages of building power here in the state of Alabama on campuses. So our primary focus has been just growing membership and helping to dispel a lot of the confusion and misunderstanding and really anti-labor propaganda that is so pervasive down here, that has led to a culture where a lot of workers are fearful. We have conversations about labor organizing. The default reaction for some folks is fear. And I think seeing y'all accomplish what you have and helping also, as you mentioned, bringing together different factions, different unions into something that's more wall to wall. We're small enough to where we have to be wall to wall. We have grad students, faculty, and staff all in the same group. But seeing that that's been successful for y'all has helped to really centralize power and organization from that has been that's I think very helpful to see. The one question I have for you, Hank, thinking along those lines, is what are some of the obstacles y'all have overcome in growing membership on campus? Especially as y'all work to include a broader collection of individuals on campus, including staff, what have been some of the challenges and how have y'all worked to overcome that?
I think one of the challenges that we face, and we continue to face, is when you bring different job categories together, there are different needs, and we worked really hard to build solidarity through conversation, trust. It took a long time. Not every negotiations in recent history that we've been engaged with, not every contract has gone smoothly. Not every, there is a history of unions taking care of one group and not necessarily the other here. So we had to work really hard. The way that we've overcome a lot of this is through conversations. We spent, I got involved in the union in probably fall of 21, just to help with doing some media work as a journalist, and quickly found myself being mobilized, so I jumped in with both feet, and we've been running since then. So we started with an effort to merge our unions, which got us talking to our members as part-time lecturers and adjuncts. We started talking to our members about power, the need for power, as we were getting ready to go into a contract campaign. So these conversations for us started early. We spent probably 3 months working on the merger campaign. We got 1,100 signatures on this merger request that represented probably about 65% of not of the membership, but of the bargaining unit. So we have about 52%, 53% is our density. I always say getting part-time people to sign up for a union is really difficult, and a lot of times our membership is not stable because people aren't necessarily teaching every semester. That's a pretty decent number considering. But we had about 65% of all part-time lecturers, all adjuncts, vote to merge with a full-time union, which would have created a much larger union. The medical union held the same vote a little bit after us with similar results, right? So that got us talking to our members early before we started on the contract campaign, and it got us talking with the other unions, and it put the notion of unity out there in a way that I can't speak to what has happened before, but for me, it put unity out there in a way that I don't think I've ever felt on campus. we also started polling our members very early on. This actually occurred before I got involved. We wanted to know what they wanted. So we wanted to make sure that our contract campaign represented the needs and desires of the full membership. It's been very important to us as an adjunct union, and I think it's important to the other unions as well that we be as democratic and open as possible. Transparency has been kind of our mantra. We don't want to surprise people. We know not everybody's going to be happy with everything that comes out of this contract, but we want to make sure that everybody feels a part of it. So, like for instance, Monday and Tuesday we're planning two big membership meetings. So, and we're doing two because some people may teach Monday night, can't make it, so they're going to come to the Tuesday one. We want them to know exactly where things are. There's been some problems during the strike in terms of communications because of the way the governor's involvement kind of locked everybody in a room in the state capitol. But we've made a real strong effort to just keep talking, and I think that that's been kind of the single most important thing. The more members we talk to, the more we seem to get them on our side. And when we've run into members who are afraid, who are we had a number of people who are real strong labor people who said, we can't strike, or this action is going to hurt our students. And we had to have conversations around that about how, this is, we're not out to harm students. We're out to support them, and we can support them better by winning a better contract. Not to mention that we have tremendous and inspiring support from students on the line. We had students organizing concerts, raising money for our strike fund. It was really inspiring, and I think for a lot of us, and this kind of gets off the question, a lot of us feel more connected to the campus and the university now than we did before. Right, I'm on campus a couple days a week as a part-time lecturer. I graduated from Rutgers, and this is the most connected that I've felt, and that's because of these conversations. It allowed us to kind of cut across lines. So,
yeah, that is so extraordinarily encouraging to hear, Hank. And and that's, I think, one thing that we're seeing is the more folks we get into the room, the more conversations we have, the more that we're having that's on a very small scale, but growing that same effect. And one thing I want to share too that resonated with me, what you shared, Hank, is that a lot of times folks will say, well, I love the university. I love this working for serving the students. And it's like, we do too. And we want it, we love it so much. We want it to be done better. And we want to create an environment where people thrive. And that kind of reframing for me too has been so helpful in getting me fired up about having these conversations, is that it's not about being adversarial necessarily. It's about calling everyone up. Like, we have to be building a better campus community. And if folks are standing in the way of that, they need to reevaluate what kind of campus they want, because if they want the best possible campus, they need to support their workers.
Right.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, that's why I make a point of, I have my Rutgers shirt on, right? We have a lot of union shirts, so I wore them during the strike, but I make a point of wearing some of this Rutgers stuff, especially when I'm talking about this stuff, because I want that there's a message, I think, that comes with that says I'm a member of the union. I'm working for the workers, but I'm also a member of this community. I'm an alum. I'm a faculty member. I am, my niece attends Rutgers. This is central to it. Really, in many ways, Rutgers has become central to my identity, and that's important to me. And I want people to understand that that's why I'm in the middle of this. I want Rutgers to be the best Rutgers it can be, right? So, yeah.
Hank, John, I could talk to y'all about this all day, but we do have to. We've got to go ahead and wrap it up. I think this is fantastic stuff. Hank, very, very excited for y'all over there. We're going to continue to monitor the situation. Hope you'll keep us updated if as things progress. And congratulations. Good luck, and keep up the fight.
Yeah, I have a piece. Should be early next week in the Progressive.
Awesome.
On this as well. So, if you want to send your listeners over there, they can see. So,
all
excellent.
Right. Thanks, all. John Gilmer is a member of the United Campus Workers of America at the University of Alabama, and Hank Callett is a member of one of the Rutgers unions that went on strike last week. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report. We're going to take a break really quick and be right back with Warren Tidwell. Before we go, I want to mention that the North Alabama Area Labor Council, which is the regional federation of unions, is having a barbecue at 11 today at Bronze Spring Park. And I'm actually going to be cutting out early to start making some hamburgers for y'all. So if you want hamburgers made by me, then go on down to Bronze Spring Park Pavilion 1. And we're going to have hamburgers. We're going to have sausage links. We're going to have chicken. We're going to have barbecue sandwiches from Lawler's. But the rest of the stuff's going to be made by us. So really excited about it. Head on down Bronze Spring Park Pavilion 1 from 11 to 4. Unions from North Alabama are going to be out there. Going to be a smaller affair, but it will be fun. We will have plenty of food. So come on down. And with that, we're going to go ahead and head into a break, and Adam is going to take you out with Warren Tidwell from Hometown Action.
There's a lot of talk about a shortage of workers, but that's not the case with IBW 558. We have provided our customers over 3,000 workers and performed over 3 million man-hours in a pandemic year. With 8,000 OJT hours, 900 classroom hours, OSHA 30, and a state license, our members receive the equivalent of a master's degree. That's what makes IBW 558 the right choice for your electrical needs. Look us up at Facebook or at IBW558.org.
Support for this program is provided by the International Association for Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama. Learn more at iamaw44.org. Support for this program also comes from the Iron Workers, Local 477. So if you are looking for contractors with lower than average EMR and TRIR, they tell me that if you need to know what those mean, then you will. Or if you need to supplement a workforce at any level for any amount of time, short or long term, if you need iron workers that come trained and certified at no extra cost, or if you need workers from superintendent down to general laborer, and you're looking to start work on a project, or you're unhappy with your current contractor situation, you need to call my friend Jeb Miles with the Iron Workers Local 477. They only work with the best in the business, vetted contractors, and can do all kinds of jobs from roofing to steel and bridge erection, from welding to heavy rigging, from structural repairs to machinery alignment, and much more. They supply manpower on 4 of the 5 largest projects in North Alabama, so you know they're legit. If you need good quality, safe, efficient, diligent, and knowledgeable workers on your job, then you need the Iron Workers Local 477. Call Jeb Miles at 256-383-3334 or via email at local477@bellsouth.net, and make sure you tell them that you heard about them on the Valley Labor Report.
We're the nurses, firefighters, and claims representatives that help keep our government services running. We respond to natural disasters. We care for our nation's veterans, and we investigate discrimination in the workplace. We are federal and D.C. government workers, and we are proud to serve the American people. Working in more than 70 agencies across the government, we know we can fulfill our mission because our union has our back. Learn more at afge.org. Paid for by the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO.
The Laborers International Union of North America, Local 366, is proudly recruiting North Alabama workers to work construction and nuclear plant maintenance. If you're interested, please contact Donna at their training center to start the process. That phone number is 256-415-7452.
Again, that phone number is 256-415-7452. No experience is needed. Free training is offered, but you must be able to pass a background check and a drug test. Local hiring that grows our community with good-paying jobs that have benefits is their mission. Live better, work union, Local 366, feel the power.
Support for this program also comes from the Mid-South Council of Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. Learn more at rwdsu.info.
Do you work in an auto manufacturing plant? Are you tired of taking pride in your work without getting the respect you deserve? Consider joining the fight to unionize. Auto workers across the industry are coming together because with a union, we can negotiate for the pay, benefits, and security that we deserve and can help sustain our families. In union plants, workers bargain for long-term wage increases, competitive bonuses, and more affordable benefits. You can join the growing wave of organizing today. Find out more and contact us at Uniting Auto Workers on Facebook or contact UAW Region 8 in Lebanon, Tennessee by going to www.uawregion8.net. That's www.uawregion8.net. A better future is ours.
All right, folks, you are still listening to Alabama's only union talk radio show. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Adam Keller. My co-host, Jacob Morrison, he has dipped out for the morning to go to the North Alabama Labor Council barbecue, and we hope you will join us there if you are in the area for sure. Really looking forward to the barbecue. Hope to see some of our listeners. Hope to see some good union folks in the area enjoying some food and fellowship. So our next interview, I'm really looking forward to. I think it's going to be some important information, some information that's really not getting out in the mainstream media, frankly. And I think it's important that we lift up the communities in our state that have experienced tragedy. And certainly the community of Camp Hill, Alabama, has experienced a lot of tragedy in the past month or so. And one of the folks I know that is doing a lot of good work down there is Warren Tidwell. Warren's been on the show before, previously in his capacity with Hometown Action. He is actually branching out. He's got a new project, which he's going to tell us about. But before he does that, he's going to tell us a little bit about Camp Hill and what's been going on there. So, Warren, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time this morning.
Thanks for having me. Camp Hill, Alabama is in Tallapoosa County in East Alabama. It's a little town of about 1,000 folks, and probably 60% below the poverty line. It's 90% African American. And about 3 weeks ago, we got a hailstorm that showed me what the power of hailstorms can do. And we've had softball to grapefruit size hail for around 15 to 20 minutes throughout the little town, about 9 square miles, and it affected 98% of the town. We lost about 80 to 90% of our cars were totaled. All 50 cars at public housing were totaled. We don't have a grocery store. We don't have a laundromat. We've got a couple of convenience stores and a Dollar General, like many rural areas, but it's a mile from the center of town. We've got a fairly vulnerable population, a lot of elderly folks, a lot of developmentally disabled folks. And it's a tough situation for what we're dealing with. It's distinctly devastating in that uninsured, underinsured folks can't get their roofs fixed. Some can't even afford the deductibles. And even if they could, they're not getting enough money to fix these roofs. So we've probably got 450 homes damaged that all will need roofs. Just about every resident, every business, every church here will need new roofs. Sadly, dozens and dozens of those are covered with tarps right now, and we don't have a disaster declaration. We have did the EMA assessment, and we are looking, to get that, hopefully get that disaster declaration, but we don't have it yet.
So yeah, that was what I was going to ask is, what has been the response of government at the local level, the state level, and even federal level? What kind of resources or support, if any, has been provided to this community?
Well, I have to say the local leadership has been fantastic. They're
Good.
doing everything they can for their people. We're working with County Commissioner T.C. Coley, who has just been phenomenal.
Former colleague of mine. I actually worked with TC. I remember many interesting conversations with TC. So I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, good guy, and has been out on the EMA assessments with us. Has made all the calls that he could. Got us connected with Congressman Mike Rogers' office on a meeting, and of course we haven't heard anything since from Congressman Mike Rogers. But the assessment's been sent to the state. Local EMA has been phenomenal, and they are doing everything they can to get the help that they need. Jason Moran, the EMA director of Tallapoosa County, has been just wonderful to work with. But we're just kind of hanging in limbo right now, wondering if we're going to get that declaration.
Right. So what are y'all doing in the meantime? I mean, it sounds to me like the community is kind of banding together to just do the work that needs to be done. Is that pretty much what's going on? Is you and your folks, your friends and colleagues down there are just banding together doing some mutual aid?
Sure. The volunteer fire department here has been phenomenal. They did a swift water rescue early in the storm, and they tarped a couple hundred houses. And sadly, we are also affected by another disaster in that many people are familiar with the Dadeville shooting. What they don't realize is that was a great deal of Camp Hill folks. That's 10 minutes from us. The family hosting the party, wonderful family in town, lost their son, Phil Dowdell, as good a kid as you could ever hope to meet, had a very bright future. And the same volunteer fire department, sadly, was some of the first responders to that shooting last Saturday night.
Oh, no.
Right. We've got a lot of folks here in town with injured children. We have a family that's been displaced. Their son is going to be paralyzed from the waist down for the rest of his life. We've got a lot of folks that we're trying to get these roofs fixed where the water's leaking in, that their children, they're going to make it, but they were also shot as well. And the whole story hasn't been told from that particular tragedy. But when it is, people will realize that we had a lot of our best kids injured and taken away from us in this town.
Yeah, it's unbelievable to think a small town that already, had its fair share of struggles and challenges would endure this historic storm where everyone is affected. Everyone's home, everyone's car, everyone's place of worship is affected. And then to have this tragic shooting just a few weeks later, it's heartbreaking for the community. And I really appreciate that you're down there doing what you can to help. And I appreciate the efforts of the volunteer fire department, Commissioner Coley, everyone who is doing something. It's a tragedy, and I believe our entire state should band together and rally behind this community because there are so many needs. Could you speak to that? What are some of, you've spoken to it a little bit already, but, what are some of the needs of the community there? Like, how can people actually help and pitch in themselves?
For sure. We have had a lot of donations from some of the bigger orgs and churches come in for food and things like that. That's been fantastic. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has provided us not only with the software to manage this, but with a tractor trailer load of food that we are continuing to distribute. Red Cross, we got 15,000 shelf-stable meals. The food and all those things right now, those needs are being met because of the people on the ground here working to do that outreach. For me personally, as you said, formerly of Hometown Action, long-term recovery and what Camp Hill needs doesn't necessarily fall under their mission. And so in a move that was more out of necessity than desire, because, I still love and admire many of my colleagues at Hometown, there's something that we're doing in forming the Alabama Center for Rural Organizing and Systemic Solutions, better known as ACROSS, and we're going to headquarter that here. Me, some of the volunteer fire departments, some of the locals, to try and manage the long-term recovery here. That the big thing that we really need right now is if there are people who can tarp roofs, because this is just Band-Aids that we're putting on. And there's so many things that will come up in the future. Some of the families who have been affected by both the storm and the shooting have a great deal of needs, but I'll give you the information to get in touch with me. That's going to be the best way for me to direct folks.
Yeah, so talk to us a little bit more about ACROSS. What exactly do you plan to do with this new project, and how can folks get plugged in?
We're planning this as if FEMA's not coming. Like, we're not even thinking about that. We're hoping for it. We're working for it. We've already started a case management system for the people affected. We're going to do this in the way that a lot of long-term recovery committees that I've been a part of in the past do. A lot of times it's outside entities. We're going to create our own method. We've already begun with the case management, hopefully matching individuals with nonprofits, churches, individuals who want to help, so that we can just match need to resource. That is going to be the community resilience side of what we're doing. And another really neat thing I think that's being born out of this, excuse me, is that the volunteer fire department and we're going to work to form the Hook and Ladder Disaster Academy. And what that's going to be is that this volunteer fire department is going to go to other volunteer fire departments who are open to it and train them on this system that we've developed to manage this. Because our rural communities, quite often, the volunteer fire departments, the disasters fall upon them. And so, as sad and tragic as all of this is, I try to focus on the fact that there's going to be some good changes that come out of this that help us. Because me, my heart's in the rural South. It's where I come from. I want to help create new ways and new models for these other small towns that have few resources, to use what they have. So that is. That's essentially what. Sorry, sorry, I got somebody.
I got to say, I'm impressed. I'm impressed, and I agree with you. I hope that despite all of this tragedy, that there's some good that comes out of it. And I think there already is some good that's coming out of it, because you see, the better side of humanity there with the folks like yourself who are pitching in and doing what they can, whether it's financially or physically, to really support people and lift people up, and give folks, a hand up. And I think that's really important. So do y'all have an official, social media page yet? Or like, how could folks contact you? Because I know this is a very new thing. And obviously all of, this is very fresh. So I know it's, fluid in motion, but, if folks are interested in learning more about Camp Hill and what's going on there, the recovery efforts, and helping you out with ACROSS, how could they reach out?
Best way is to email me, warren@acrossalabama.org. Our focus right now is getting the help, immediate response that we need to get, that we've been, just neck deep in for 3 weeks. That will come. And there aren't, part of the reason that we're doing this is because there's no nonprofit in this town doing the work like what we're doing. So just reach out to me at that email, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. And the requisite social media sites, websites, everything will come soon, as soon as we get some of these roofs fixed.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would encourage folks, if you're part of an organization, if you're part of a union, and y'all are looking to do some good in the world, here is a great opportunity to lift up our neighbors who really could use the support. Warren, was there anything else I didn't ask you that you wanted to share this morning with folks as we wrap up?
Oh, no, I appreciate you taking the time to tell this story, because as you said, we're dealing with a town that is maybe one of the first to deal with a natural disaster and a mass shooting at the same time.
Right.
And so it's going to be a long road, but with y'all amplifying this, folks getting in touch with us, we can't do this alone. It's going to take all of us together. So thank you for taking time to talk to me today.
Absolutely. Warren, thank you so much for all you're doing. best of luck with this new project. Definitely keep us posted on what's going on down there and how we can help.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
All right, folks. So Warren at acrossalabama.org. I really encourage folks, if you're listening, if you have any capacity to support, whether that's in person or chipping in a couple bucks or spreading the word, just spreading the word on your own social media networks, letting folks know. I will say Tread by Lee Hedgepeth, I believe is his name. He just put out a good article about the situation down in Camp Hill. It's really some of the only media I've seen, so definitely recommend folks check that out. So yeah, really appreciate what Warren's doing down there. He's doing great work, and it's just tragic to see a community like that, dealing with such adversity back to back like that. And not surprised that we're seeing a lack of systemic support, but I hope to see that change as more folks get involved and spread the word. So wanted to wrap things up this morning. A couple of reminders. I do want to remind folks that we also air on Unclaimed Mysteries Radio, which is a Huntsville-based internet radio station. You can listen live on Live 365. Just search Unclaimed Mysteries Radio. As we're wrapping up here on FM, we have some reminders and some events to share. Want to let folks know that Jacob's new article called An Explosion, Layoffs, and the End of Paper in J just came out with In These Times magazine and Real News Network. So you can go to inthesetimes.com or check out Real News Network for a link to that. As we mentioned earlier, the North Alabama Labor Council has their barbecue today, Earth Day, April 22nd at Bronze Spring Park. That's the one over by Drake Avenue. It's for union members and allies and friends here in the Tennessee Valley, so y'all come out and enjoy some food and fellowship. I wanted to take a moment of personal privilege to give some IATSE 900 shout-outs today. Shout out to my IATSE Ken, who've been supporters of the Valley Labor Report. We had a conversation the other night as we were getting ready to break down a concert, and the idea of radio shout-outs came up. So Rachel, Nicole, if you're listening, here's your shout-out like we discussed. My union sister Rachel is a big fan of the show and also recently helped out our musician friends in Obed-Edom with their music video. Thanks to Deborah and Aaron for their generous support. We appreciate it. Shout out to my brother Greg, who has given me some good ideas for the show and has a wealth of knowledge on Jefferson and Walker counties. Shout out to my union sister Sally, who's been very supportive and even told her neighbor about the show. And thanks to my vice president Bob, who's been supportive and loves to introduce us as the loudest voice for labor in the Tennessee Valley. Really appreciate my union Ken and wanted to give some well-deserved shout outs. I am proud to be part of Local 900. Looking forward to many good things ahead in our union. Next, as they do each month, our friends at Labor Notes are hosting a series of online trainings. If you're looking to get involved in your union or activism in general, I highly recommend it. In May, they'll do a 3-part Secrets of a Successful Organizer series, as well as a workshop on what to do when your union breaks your heart. You can find out more at labornotes.org. Our community, our environment, and our ecosystem is under attack. Join the Journey for Justice Alliance for their Equity or Else Town Hall today, April 22nd in Birmingham at the Movement Fellowship Church at 3 p.m. The Alabama International Fringe Festival is a 3-day event taking place on May 12th, 13th, and 14th down in Montgomery area, and that will include a performance of Toll Puddle, the musical, which is a musical about union struggles in 1800s England. Hoping to talk to the director soon. If you're not on our email list at tvlr.fm, definitely sign up for that to stay up to date. You can leave us a voicemail at 844-899-TVLR. That's 844-899-8857. You can donate or buy our merch at tvlr.fm. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We're heading into overtime where we're going to do a special Earth Day themed episode that you don't want to miss. All power to the workers. All right, folks, I do believe we are off the FM feed. Probably ran a little bit long there. But that's okay. That's okay. We're going to take a quick break, and I'm going to have a special Earth Day themed overtime today. I've got an interview with GASP. I've got a few quick segments on some important bills in the Alabama legislature, as well as a replay of our interview we did with Matt Huber on his new book, Climate Change as Class War. So let's take a quick commercial break. I'll be right back with Earth Day overtime. Thanks for joining, y'all.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell. Go to Harlan County, there is no neutral there. You'll either be a union man or a thug party age player. Which side are you on? 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 Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell. Which side are you on? 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 Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell. Go to Harlan County, there is no neutral there. You'll either be a union man or a thug party age player. Which side are you on? 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 Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell. Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
All right, folks, you are still listening to the Valley Labor Report, Alabama's only union talk radio show. We are now in overtime, and like I said, we're going to do a special Earth Day themed episode of Overtime today. It's just me in the studio right now. Jacob had to dip out early to go to the North Alabama Labor Council barbecue. So again, if you are a local listener, the barbecue is happening from 11 to 4 at Braun Spring Park over by Drake Avenue there. So there's food, there's friendship, there's fellowship, there's the nice weather, the nice spring weather today. So y'all check that out. So it is Earth Day, and I wanted to really look at the intersection of the labor movement and the environmental movement and discuss how the environment and climate change affects us as working class people. So I have a few stories here to hit this morning, followed by an interview with a great sister over at GASP, which is a great organization working on air pollution in the Birmingham area. And then we have our interview with Matt Huber regarding his book, Climate Change as Class War. It's from a while back. Some of you may have missed it. We have a lot of new listeners since we did this interview. So if you missed it the first time around, hopefully you will check it out. Those of you who did hear it, hey, check it out again. Maybe you'll hear something new, learn something new. But we will finish today's overtime with that interview. So starting out, I wanted to talk about water. We need to protect our water, land, and air for our families and communities and for the generations to come after. Pollution disproportionately impacts working class people, whether it's in our neighborhoods or in our workplaces. We need stronger regulations, not weaker ones. We need good union jobs enforcing these regulations and restoring and protecting our natural environment. It's critical as a labor movement that we support workers where they're at, including workers in pollutive and extractive industries. But we must also fight for an economy and a society that can respond to the existential crisis of climate change and environmental destruction. That means moving beyond industries of pollution and extraction. And that means ensuring justice for those workers in those industries, as well as the working class communities impacted by these industries. And the working class communities impacted by climate change, such as the community of Camp Hill, Alabama, that we just discussed earlier in the show with Warren Tidwell, right? We are seeing more and more severe storms and natural disasters, and our communities need resiliency. That takes investment. We need resilient communities that can withstand the increasing tide of storms and other disasters that are plaguing our communities and affecting so many people. When it comes to water, according to Earth Justice, the future of clean water in the United States is at stake. A federal district court in North Dakota just blocked the EPA's science-based rule revising the definition of quote-unquote waters of the United States. The ruling could strip protections from thousands of wetlands, streams, and interstate waters in 24 states. Last month, a judge ruled the same way in a case impacting Texas and Idaho, leaving 26 states without adequate clean water protections. Earth Justice says they will use every legal tool available to fight back against this devastating ruling and protect the Clean Water Act. This news came out just days before Earth Day, an annual event created to advocate for legal and regulatory mechanisms that protect our environment. While Earth Day has become a day of celebration, it is also a reminder that we must continue to fight for our planet. The threats to our environment and our health do not cease. Big industry groups and Republican attorney generals in the 26 states that challenge the EPA's rule claim they want to gut the Clean Water Act to regulate their own water. But without having to abide by the Act's standards, states can get away with polluting waterways or enforcing weak water regulations. The rule that was just blocked has been essential to fend off coal mining, fracking, and other reckless extraction. And without it, many communities are left without the tools they need to protect their health and the land and waters they rely on. This Earth Week, I hope you'll join Earth Justice in fighting back. We can't let polluters and extractive industries line their pockets while our communities suffer the consequences. Clean water is one of our most basic human rights, and together we can ensure that it's protected with the full power of the law. And I did want to mention, worth noting, that Alabama is one of the 26 states impacted. So where's our state government? Where's our media? You know, what kind of impact could this have on workers and our neighborhoods? You know, what about fishing, both for leisure and for work? And I'll talk more about fishing in a moment, but a lot of questions I have about this rule change and how it's going to impact folks. And I know there will be the inevitable response that it's for jobs, but call me radical, call me crazy. I don't think we have to sacrifice clean water for the sake of jobs. I think there's plenty of work that needs to be done in this country. There is plenty of labor to be done and respected and paid before we start sacrificing clean water, clean air. It's just, it's not an argument that I believe is very serious. On the subject of water, my next story is involving rising sea levels. Sea levels are rising rapidly along the southern United States, according to a new study. A study published earlier this month finds sea level rise along the coast of the southeastern United States has accelerated rapidly since 2010, raising fears that tens of millions of Americans' homes and cities across the South will be at risk from flooding in the decades to come. This is from an article recently published by Yahoo News. According to Sonka Dengendorf, an assistant professor of river coastal science and engineering at Tulane University over in New Orleans, he told the Washington Post it's a window into the future. The paper and another published last month in the Journal of Climate find that sea levels along the Gulf Coast and the southern Atlantic coast have risen an average of 1 centimeter per year since 2010. That translates to nearly 5 inches over the last 12 years. And it's about double the rate of average global sea level rise during the same time period. I should probably repeat that. Here in the South, along our coast, the sea is rising at about double the rate of the rest of the world, the average rate in the world. So here again, the South is disproportionately bearing the brunt of our economic system and its damaging impacts. The Journal of Climate Study found that the hurricanes that have recently hammered the Gulf Coast, including Michael in 2018 and Ian, which was blamed in the deaths of over 100 Floridians last year, had a more severe impact because of higher sea levels. It turns out that the water level associated with Hurricane Ian was the highest on record due to the combined effect of sea level rise and storm surge, said Professor Yin, a climate scientist at the University of Arizona and the author of the Journal of Climate Study. Data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the NOAA, show the water level at Lake Pontchartrain, an estuary bordering New Orleans, is 8 inches higher than it was in 2006. Other cities threatened by rising oceans in the region include Houston, Miami, and Mobile, Alabama. The centimeter per year rate is far faster than experts had expected, and it's more in line with projections made for the end of the century. High tide flooding, when the tides bring water onto normally dry land on rain-free days, has more than doubled on the Gulf Coast and the Southeast Coast since the beginning of this century, according to NOAA. Recent years have seen records for high tide flooding obliterated. The city of Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, went from 3 days of high tide flooding in 2000 to 22 days in 2020. A study by scientists with the University of Miami, NOAA, NASA, and other institutions, which has not yet undergone peer review, to be clear, found that the southeastern sea level rise accounted for 30 to 50% of flood days in 2015 through 2020. In low-lying coastal regions, an increase of even a few centimeters in the background sea level can break the regional flooding thresholds and lead to coastal inundation, according to the study. So continuing our special Earth Day focus, I did want to highlight pending legislation in Alabama that is actually being supported by environmental groups across the state. So it's not all bad news. We actually have something right now working its way through the legislature that's positive. Can't always say that in Alabama. So the following is from Mobile Baykeeper. Did you know that throughout 98 waterways in Alabama, there are 213 advisories to limit the amount of fish you should eat? That data is almost unknown to the general public. HB 297, also known as the SURE Act, ensures government accountability and transparency by giving you access to this critical data that the public already owns. Help safeguard your family's health and our fishing heritage. So what can you do to ensure our fishing is protected, our families stay safe, and this vital piece of legislation is passed? Well, contact your representative. Your voice is vital. Call your representative and tell them you want to see Alabama's fish consumption advisories improved. Urge them to vote for the bill as written. For generations, fishing has been an essential part of life along the Gulf Coast. It's why humans settled here in the first place. From the Mississippian era to today, fishing our waters has given those who live in coastal Alabama much sustenance and many memories. Days that begin with early morning trips to the water and end that evening with the family gathering around as fresh a dinner as you could ever have. Days like these have been the way of life for many in the region. In coastal Alabama, fishing is not just a pastime or a source of sustenance, it's a part of who we are. However, over many years, our waters and fish have been changed by pollution. In fact, 213 advisories recommend limiting fish consumption in various water bodies across Alabama. Now, Alabama has an opportunity to protect the health of everyone who eats wild-caught fish from our waters with the Safe and Healthy Outdoor Recreation Act of 2023, also known as the SURE Act. Senator Linda Coleman Madison introduced the Senate version, SB 105, which will ensure outdoor recreationists or paddlers, swimmers, and fishers across Alabama are better informed about fish consumption advisories in our rivers, streams, creeks, and bays. So far, the bill has bipartisan support in the Alabama Senate. But Mobile Baykeeper is asking for your help to help get it passed. For more information about the bill and how you can get involved, you can read the latest information at mobilebaykeeper.org. So, really wanted to lift that up. I know some other environmental groups are also working on that bill as well, the SURE Act. Glad to see something positive actually working its way through the legislature. From what I can tell, it seems to be on a good track. So if you get a chance, email your rep. Give your state rep a call, your state senator. Just let them know that you're interested in the SURE Act, that you'd like to see the bill as written. Go ahead, be approved. This should be a totally non-controversial piece of legislation, right? It should not be controversial that we know which fish are safe to eat and which ones aren't when we fish our own waters here in Alabama. And that previous message from Mobile Baykeeper about protecting our fishing in Alabama reminded me to let folks know about the Union Sportsman Alliance. The Union Sportsmen's Alliance USA is a union-operated, union-dedicated conservation organization. It's committed to uniting the more than 6 million active and retired AFL-CIO trade union members who hunt, fish, shoot, and enjoy outdoor recreation into one community with a shared commitment to educate future generations of sportsmen and sportswomen, conserve healthy wildlife habitat, and volunteer their time and skills for projects that improve outdoor access for all. The Union Sportsmen's Alliance goal is to become North America's largest community of union sportsmen and women committed to preserving our outdoor heritage for generations to come. You can find out more on unionsportsman.org. So I just wanted to give them a little shout out as it seemed on topic today for our Earth Day overtime. The next segment I have comes from our friends at Energy Alabama. I got some action alerts from them this past week, and they are very concerned about a bill that's working its way through the legislature called SB 40. So Energy Alabama is calling for urgent action regarding SB 40, which has now passed out of the Alabama legislature, and it only awaits Governor Ivey's signature. Energy Alabama has an online action form that makes it easy to contact the governor and ask her to veto the legislation. SB 40, if enacted, will prohibit local governments from passing any ordinance, law, regulation, or rule that would require quote-unquote latent features in new residential construction. According to Energy Alabama, this means that SB 40 will prohibit local governments from taking action to make it easier and less costly in the future to transition to clean energy, like electric vehicles or solar. SB 40 will add to the cost later when the residential property owner, someone like you, decides to add solar or an EV charging station or otherwise expand electric capacity on the property. These additional costs could be substantial. It's much more affordable to build in the capacity to expand at the time of construction rather than retrofitting later, which makes perfect sense to me. Here's an example. Rather than adding $25 to $100 to the cost of your new home to install an outlet for an electrical vehicle charger you may buy in the future, the Alabama legislature would rather you be forced to do an infrastructure retrofit later on and pay an extra $500 to $1,000. According to Energy Alabama, SB 40 is a naked attempt to protect fossil fuels like oil and gas that are dirtier and costlier. The bill is flying under the radar and is on the fast track for passage. As I said, it's already passed both houses of the legislature, so at this point, our only chance is to convince Governor Kay Ivey to veto the legislation, which is what Energy Alabama is calling for. So when you get a chance, go online to energyalabama.org. You can fill out their online action form there. You can find out more about the bill and why they are concerned about the bill. All right, so coming up next, I have an interview that I really enjoyed with Jaleesa Milton of GASP. And GASP is a really cool organization in Birmingham. I'm a longtime member of GASP. I believe in the work that they do. The Greater Birmingham Alliance to Stop Pollution. I got a chance to meet some of their team in Houston back in the fall. I went to the Gulf Climate Summit in Houston, and I met Jaleesa. I met a couple of other sisters working there. Michael Hansen, the executive director. And so I really enjoyed getting to meet them and know them a little bit better. And I really appreciate the work they're doing in our community. So I wanted to bring this interview on Earth Day to highlight, the environmentalists I knew were doing good work in Alabama. It seemed important to me. So without further ado, I'm going to play this interview regarding GASP, the work they do, and the intersection between labor rights and environmental justice was a big part of this conversation. So hopefully you will enjoy it. All right, folks, you are still listening to the Valley Labor Report. This is Alabama's only union talk radio show, and my name is Adam Keller. Really looking forward to this next interview. We are doing a little bit of a Earth Day special this year, and so I wanted to reach out to folks I knew in the environmental movement who are doing good work. And I was blessed to meet Jaleesa at the Houston Climate Summit, and put on by the Climate Reality Project back in October. It was a really cool event. Learned a lot, and I met great people, including some of the team at GASP, the Greater Alliance to Stop Pollution in Birmingham. Really impressed with what they do. So without further ado, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. My name is Jaleesa Milton. I'm currently the Deputy Director for Advocacy and Strategic Partnerships with GASP. And I've been in that role since last October, which might be coming on 9 months soon.
That's right. You were brand new when I met you. I forgot about that.
Yes. And it's been a really good experience doing this work. So.
Awesome. And you have some experience already in the movement, so to speak. You've been involved as an activist and an organizer and advocate. Could you speak to that? What have you been up to before this current role?
Yeah, I've for the last decade, I've been involved with so many social movements in Alabama and beyond. I graduated from undergrad and immediately jumped into work in Central Florida. And I'll talk about that a little bit later because there was some workers' rights and environmental issues there. And I was doing a lot of work with a migrant worker community there. And then kind of like coming back to law school and jumping head first in a lot of racial justice work because of my own experiences as a Black woman. And then since then, I've been doing so many things. I did budget and tax policy work. I've been doing work around reproductive justice. And so there's been a lot, of movement. But I think like when I got involved with the environmental justice work, I feel like a lot of the intersections of that work became very clear to me. So happy to be here today to talk about one of those intersections.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's one of the things that I wanted to do with this episode, and what we try to do on the Valley Labor Report throughout is to look at those intersections between workers and labor and working class more broadly, but unions specifically, with aspects of our society, whether it's race, the environment, gender. There are intersections there that all affect the way we live. And I think given your very broad activist background, I mean, if there's a struggle, seems like you've been there, pretty much whatever the arena may be. And so I think that speaks to your work, and also it's why I wanted to speak to you today. So could you introduce GASP? What is GASP? What do y'all do?
So GASP is an environmental justice organization that focuses primarily on air pollution. And it was founded to address like a lot of the air pollution in Birmingham that was remnant of a lot of the industry that was here and is still here. I don't know if everybody's seen, but there were a couple lists that came out of like about a month ago about how Birmingham is one of the top 10 cities with the worst air quality. So we're still kind of struggling through this issue, and there's a lot of things, there's a lot of movement in the city about these questions. And we also do work with climate justice, and because it's important to understand the connection that air pollution has on climate, in terms of climate, and also in terms of how some communities bear the brunt of the effects of these climate changes and weather changes and natural disasters and things like that. And there's a lot of correlations and intersections that we work on in terms of discussing resiliency of our communities because of environmental issues. Yeah, so that's just what we do. I don't know if you know, the most recent thing that people might be thinking of is the situation with the Moody landfill fire. And we do a lot of community education around air monitoring and around advocacy and helping people access process to agencies to advocate for better environments too. So that was one instance that we really jumped in because of how urgent it was and in the public health risk that it presented at that time. So people remember that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That was a big story. And I think the work that you're doing to empower folks to be able to advocate for themselves around these issues, that's so important. I think a lot of times we're led to believe that things can't change, that things can't get better, there's no use in speaking up, all that. And I think it's important that you have that backup in the education process to empower folks to be able to advocate. And something else you said that really resonates is that some communities bear the brunt of air pollution and climate change more than others. And, that was something also I learned at that event in Houston that we were at. It really, it's something I knew, but it really like hammered it home, the disparities in communities. And, there's no coincidence that it's the poorest neighborhoods, the neighborhoods with the most racial minorities. Those are the neighborhoods that seem to bear the brunt of whether it's air pollution or any other environmental catastrophe. And I think that's something that is relevant to working class people, right? Because it's our neighborhoods that are impacted. Jeff Bezos, he's probably not very concerned about air pollution, right? He's very, he can be resilient. He has the resources. It's all the rest of us that are trying and struggling to have that resiliency. So GASP is doing good work there. And you mentioned Birmingham is really a major site of pollution in this state, historically and currently. So I think that's just, it's one of those things that maybe folks don't consider a workers issue, but it absolutely is, because it's our communities and it's the industries in which we work, right? Someone works in these industries. So I think that's worth highlighting. So I wanted to ask you about that intersection, about environmental justice, air pollution, climate justice, the sorts of things y'all are working on. How does that intersect with the labor movement and unions and the sort of stuff that we work on?
Yeah, you've kind of started to name it a little bit. I know. So as I know in my family, my grandfather and his father worked in like the steel industry in Birmingham. And I grew up listening to him talk about how frustrating it was for his father to be at work and experience a lot of these really stark and rash labor issues related to safety, related to health and environment and things like that. And we see like how even in Birmingham, you see where these communities are front line to a lot of these coal industries that pollute the air, and they're literally fence line living near there. And that was a product of kind of some of these ideas originally when the city was built, in terms of having workers have access to where they worked, right? And before we had a lot of these really large conversations about, workers' rights in terms of like safety and OSHA and all these things, this was built in this way to for working class people to be living near their jobs, not necessarily about like how that could be affecting their bodies. And you're right, like some people, the people who ran these buildings in terms of like financially gaining the most probably didn't live that close. So there's these questions about like how that's still parallel. There's a lot of controversy in Birmingham about a particular neighborhood, the 35th Avenue Superfund site. And you see like how now that we have these conversations, like, people's families have been living near it for decades and generations. And, we're having these conversations about how their soil is polluted, right? And when you do something like environmental justice work, you kind of run into these conversations where these movements are pitted against each other, right? Like here, why would you want the facility to shut down? Because then I won't have my job. You see how these conversations are often seen as binary, but at the end of the day, the same people who are putting property before people's bodies in one way are also doing it in other ways, right? They decide where they're going to put their industry based on who they think would resist it, right? And so I definitely see the parallels. I also see the parallels when we talk about, how a lot of some of these political ideas about anti-regulation, like, EPA was being defunded, just as much as, these OSHA practices are being removed, this anti-regulation aspect, like you see that trickle down in several movements, not just like environmental. So it's like, it intersects in worker safety. It intersects in terms of like regulatory practices and and you can see it every time. I know one instance in Moody, when we talk about Moody, there was a conversation about like whether we have funded enough labor to like really manage these emergencies and safety in terms of that way. Like you have these conversations that arise because these first responder questions about whether like they have even been equipped well, so yeah, I see that a lot. I think I mentioned that I used to do some work in Central Florida at that time I was doing an AmeriCorps program, and I went because I wanted to help high schoolers, right?
Right.
And they were, they were like, I want to help high schoolers in Florida learn math, but then I got brought into this conversation about immigration, and the students and their families were going through working in nurseries. They were migrant workers, and they were dealing with pesticides at this particular, at these nurseries. So you see these kind of conversations about how they're treated because of their identity, but also as workers, like how that played out. And they would talk about their hands being burnt by chemicals, Wow. And there was a lake there that was called Lake Apopka. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the Farm Workers Association of Florida, but they talk about how historically they would drain this lake, farm it with workers, and then flood it back after, the harvest is over, and that lake became contaminated. But then you see how all those workers are like generationally suffering through health issues. So so you just see like these remnants of like industry treating people in these unsafe ways, and it's direct association to how they treat the environment. So there's just so many parallels, and I do think we should work together because to at least make sure these industries at least adhere to some level of standard for our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much you said there that really hits home, but I think it's the intergenerational part is really worth pulling out, because this is something that affects people's lives and their children's lives and their grandchildren's lives. It's something that affects the entire community. And, whether it's farm workers, whether it's coal miners, whatever the situation may be, and you talked about working together for certain standards. I can't help but think of the Warrior Met strike in Brookwood. And shortly after the UMWA miners went out on strike, of course, they brought in replacement workers, scabs, to the mines. And shortly after that, the Black Warrior River was heavily polluted, and so there's just another example right here in the state of Alabama of how these issues intersect. And, I think something that is also worth mentioning, you talked about the Superfund site and the EPA and the way it's been underfunded over the years. And we see the same, like you mentioned with OSHA, the National Labor Relations Board, anything related to protecting folks, whether it's our air, our water, our rights in the workplace. It seems like any functions of government that have been set up ostensibly to help us have been under threat. And something else that you said that I really liked is that, the folks who put property over people, whether that's that translates across our society, whether it's the way they treat their workers, the way they treat the neighborhoods next to their plants, whatever the situation may be, or the environment as a whole, like the air and the climate that we all have to rely on. And I think that's really, really important. Yeah. Something else I wanted to just ask you to kind of, as we close the conversation, I wanted you to tell me just, what does environmental justice mean to you? Like why do you do what you do?
Yeah. Before I took this job, I know like not everybody is like gung-ho about the climate work, but I didn't quite understand. I think I knew I wasn't against it, but I didn't understand it. And now that I've started to do the work, I feel a deeper connection to what this all means. And what I'm saying when I say that is that we don't, I find it very interesting in this like corporate society, and I've done policy work for some time, that we all recognize the kind of therapeutic, emotional enjoyment that we get from the environment. And I mean that in terms of like me, some really wealthy people on jet skis, you know, like people who go hunting,
go fishing. Yeah, absolutely.
Fishing. You know, we clearly have, not, and I want to say everyone, but I don't know everyone, but I've seen people from all backgrounds, at least on some level, acknowledge the role that has on us. And still, we end up in this situation where we make these decisions as a society to not protect that. And it's a really interesting double standard, because I definitely see the same people who make these decisions we can use like a really rich person. I don't know who an example. Go to San Tropez, go to the beach in Hawaii, and I think that I have had to think a lot about what that means to me, and also understand like the connection it has to my health. The connection, like what does it mean for some people to be able to sustain a hurricane and some people not? Their whole lives are over. And that's directly tied to the same economic, racial, whatever connections that I have thought about in the past. And how some of us who are probably the people with the lowest income are the most connected to these things, these other things. So I think I guess I say that to say I feel passionate about this issue because I can see ways that I can talk to people about it and reach their other values, like labor, like taking care of their families, like their racial identity, and talk about the kind of world we want to live in. Because there's nothing that brings us all together like living on Earth. Like there's just nothing, there's nothing. So I think I've gotten a lot from the last 9 months that has made me feel connected because of everything else I've done in social justice work. So I guess it's kind of a long way of answering that question, but yeah.
No, that's great. I mean, and that's to me, that's what it's all about, right? Is different forms of justice are all justice. And whether it's economic justice or racial justice, environmental justice, at the end of the day, it's about a better world for all of us, and recognizing our shared humanity and the dignity that we all deserve. And so I really appreciate your answer there. The last thing I'll ask is if you wanted to tell us about GASP in terms of getting plugged in, like where should folks go? Do y'all need volunteers or take volunteers? Like if anyone's interested, in just getting plugged in and finding out more, tell us about that.
Yes. So there's two things. One thing is our membership and another thing is volunteers. So we are a membership-based organization. And the reason that we are is because we like to hear from our members, like what their thoughts are about these issues. And also because it helps us understand how we can advocate in different places in the state, because we know that there's not a lot of people, a lot of organizations that do air quality work in particular. And we know that if people become members in other areas, we can engage with them and learn about this question in different ways. So I'll start there. And then, so if you want to be a member, you can go to our website, gasgroup.org. And there's different tiers, and you can choose, or you can email us if you feel like that's not an option for you too. We also do take volunteers. We take volunteers a lot because we like to do a lot of outreach. So if you like talking to people about environmental stuff, then you're good. And we also take volunteers to help with some maternal things here and there. We also take interns. So if there's somebody who is maybe in school and is thinking about doing something, then we do that too. And you can email our executive director, Michael Hansen, and his email address is mhansen@gasgroup.org, or you can look on our website and email it there too. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of ways to plug in.
Awesome. And I'm wearing my shirt today. I am a proud member of GASP, because I believe in the work that y'all do, and I appreciate the work that y'all do. Was there anything else? I didn't ask you anything else you wanted to say before we end it today?
No, I thank you so much for inviting us, because I've heard really good things about this work too, and about you, Adam. And I got the Valley Labor Report experience now. Some people were like, I wish I was going on there. So it was kind of cool to know I can talk to y'all.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And anytime y'all have something going on, if y'all have a big event coming, or if there's just, unfortunately, chances are there's going to be another disaster. And so there could be something really pressing to talk about. So whether it's yourself or anyone else from GASP, always welcome on the show, and really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
All right, y'all. Really appreciate y'all still tuning in, and I really hope y'all enjoyed that interview with Jaleesa Milton from GASP. I enjoyed it myself. Enjoyed talking with her. Appreciate the work that she's doing in her community and through GASP as well. And encourage y'all to check them out. Definitely encourage you to check them out. So before we wrap things up with our Climate Changes Class War interview, I did just want to mention that we are aware there was a lot going on this week that we just didn't get to talk about this week. There's so much going on that there's a lot of important topics we didn't include in today's episode. For example, Governor Kay Ivey has banned a teacher textbook in the pre-K department and has ousted the agency head, Dr. Barbara Cooper. I highly recommend the Alabama Reflector article about this issue. It is just totally bizarre and disgraceful and shameful, in my opinion. And, my sympathies go to Dr. Barbara Cooper, someone I worked with during her time as deputy superintendent in Huntsville City Schools, someone I respected. She worked for Casey Wardynski, so, clearly we didn't always see eye to eye, but she was someone that I certainly respected, and I believe genuinely wanted what's best for the kids, and I think that's the spirit of her work at the pre-K department, from what I've observed at least. And so it's sad to see her publicly, ousted in this way. I can certainly relate, Dr. Cooper. I know some of the feelings you're feeling, but it's just really a poor move by Governor Kay Ivey, a petty move on her part to do this, and of course on a late Friday evening press release kind of thing. So yeah, check out the article from Alabama Reflector. I think we're going to try to republish that on our website as well, tvlr.fm. Really enjoyed their reporting on that. Also wanted to mention that the Writers Guild of America is delivering a message to entertainment investors and analysts as the Screenwriters Union ratchets up pressure on studios amid contract negotiations. If the two sides can't reach an agreement, it could result in the first work stoppage by the WGA in 15 years. The contract is set to expire May 1st. Writers voted by a huge historic margin, 98% in favor, for strike authorization. That's huge. 98% in favor of strike authorization, which of course allows union leaders to call a walkout if they are unable to negotiate a new contract. The earliest a strike could happen is May 2nd. So stay tuned to that developing story. We also had more news out of D.C., where Republicans in the House are pushing an austerity budget using the debt limit as a bargaining chip. We'll have to stay tuned to that. I know there's also some news from the National Domestic Workers Alliance working on getting some of their representatives on the show to discuss that. There was a new executive order from the Biden administration that, seems promising. Locally, workers at Old Town Coffee in 5 Points here in Huntsville, just around the road from Spice Radio Studio, the workers at Old Town Coffee walked out. One of the workers' testimonies has been going around on Facebook, and some folks tagged us on it. We did see that, and we're in communication and trying to find out more about what's going on there. All that and a lot more happening in working class news, so definitely stay tuned for next week's The Valley Labor Report. And also wanted to encourage folks to stay tuned to Thursday morning's Shop Talk. Of course, Shop Talk is the new series we have started, which is focused on labor education, history, and training. So we have talked about how to get involved as a new member and some of the legal rights you have as a union member. We have talked to historian Max Frazier about studying the working class. Talked to D'Emanuel Hall from Labor Notes about the resources they provide. All that and more. A little bit of labor history. We've talked about the Walker County teacher strike of 1979. This week, I looked at American involvement in the Spanish Civil War. And, that's one of my favorite topics, so I certainly enjoyed that. So Shop Talk airs every Thursday. You can check it out live on YouTube and Facebook, or a few days later as a podcast. So if you miss it, no worries. Check out our YouTube channel, or a couple days later, you can download it as a podcast on your favorite app. So that's all I have for you all today before we transition into climate change as class war interview. Really enjoyed this interview back from, I believe it was June, so it has been a while. And like I said, many of you may have missed this the first go around. Many of you are new listeners, and we thought it was important, with it being Earth Day today and having an Earth Day theme here in Overtime. We thought it was important to bring this interview back out for, a little bit different kind of discussion about climate change, climate justice, the politics surrounding these issues, and how it impacts working class people, including how we fight these issues, what kind of language we use when we fight these issues, all that comes up and more. So without further ado, y'all check out this interview, Matt Huber, Climate Change as Class War.
Capitalism really exploits the working class. It makes their life worse. It makes their life insecure. Really, we need a politics that offers more to them, that offers them more security, more power.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Climate Change as Class War is a new book that seeks to reframe the conversation around climate change by Matthew T. Huber, professor of geography in the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs at Syracuse University. You can buy his new books online at Powell's, a union bookstore, and if you purchase his book through the union's link, 7.5% of your purchase goes directly to their strike fund. So that is very cool. Consider purchasing his book there. Matt is also our next guest. Matt, welcome to the Valley Labor Report.
Thanks for having me, Jacob.
Absolutely. So, like I said, your book, it seems to me, is largely an attempt to try to reframe the conversation around climate change. What do you feel like is wrong with the current conversation about climate change in this country?
Well, there's a lot, I think. I think, when you hear people talk about the struggle over climate change, they often mention a couple problems. They often mention that there's a lot of denial of the science around climate change. And so there's a lack of awareness or understanding of the truth of the science of this dire threat that really threatens our species and the planet. And there is a lot of discussion about responsibility for this crisis that centers on people's consumption actions. And I think rightly, it focuses on how the rich tend to be more responsible with their high consumption lifestyles, whether it be flying a lot or eating steak or driving a Hummer or private jets, whatever it might be. Both of these, I think, sort of avoid what I think is at the core of the crisis, which is industrial production. And, this is climate change is ultimately a product of something that started about 200 years ago that we call the Industrial Revolution, which shifted energy systems to burning this stuff that we can dig out of the ground called fossil fuel. And this industrial system of production reliant on fossil fuels is really at the core of the crisis. And what struck me is that when you go back to sort of old school socialist or working class theories of class struggle, theories of class conflict, in the old days, it really was centered on this struggle over industrial production, over who owns and controls the means of production, and how capitalists sort of take that control over production and shift it towards profit at all other costs. And of course, workers and working class people have struggled to take their own forms of control over production, whether it be through strikes or unionization. And so this kind of old school class analysis focused on production seemed to be a much more accurate way to analyze the current struggle we're facing, and actually like really center it as a material struggle over how we produce things. And I think that really helps us shift away from this sometimes pretty moralistic type of politics that focuses on, do you know the science? Do you believe science? Or are you virtuously low carbon enough in your consumption and your lifestyle, and all these kind of actions you can take as an individual consumer, which again, every individual consumer is provisioned by a producer who's usually a capitalist who owns that production and is trying to seek profits on that production. So all these consumers with their lifestyles are ultimately can be linked back to for-profit capitalist producers. And I would argue the people profiting off these relationships deserve way more blame, way more responsibility, and really have the power in our society. They're the ones that really control these energy systems. And really, we're going to have to take on their power if we're going to be able to get our production system off of fossil fuels, which is ultimately what we have to do to forestall this really serious planetary crisis.
One of the things that always fascinated me about environmental politics, like as soon as I learned this, I've never been able to get it out of my mind. The fact that the crying Indian guy who was actually an Italian, that whole campaign was funded by corporations like Coca-Cola and the Mason-Dixon Company in the wake of laws that were attempting to ban single-use products.
Right.
But there was a move in the country across state legislatures and things like this to attempt to get at the production of these single-use products.
Exactly.
And the companies were able to, through a mass marketing campaign, shift the conversation from production to consumption, like saying that, oh no, it's not our fault that we're producing this terrible product. It's your fault for consuming it.
Yes. No, absolutely. And that led into all these campaigns where it focused on individual decisions to recycle or basically produce less waste, and it all became the onus is all on the individual. And what's really interesting, I think that campaign was early 70s, maybe late 60s. It's just continued from that point. And there's actually a recent paper that was published that did a systematic analysis of ExxonMobil's kind of advertisements and found that there's this consistent narrative that they promote that tries to shift blame for climate change to individuals and their carbon footprints and how they consume things. And of course, that shifts the blame away from the Exxon Mobils of the world. And that's what they want, right? It's actually quite hilarious that the very like concept of a carbon footprint was invented by British Petroleum. And they've recently, you can see them tweeting out these carbon footprint calculators that asked people on Twitter to kind of, hey, get involved, find out how you can pitch in to save the climate. And the whole analysis of a carbon footprint, like I was saying before, assumes that responsibility and emissions are only in this realm of consumption, and all the people profiting off our consumption are just erased by these quantitative methods to estimate people's so-called footprints. And so it's a really sophisticated strategy to shift all attention and blame onto us, the consumers, and a lot of working class consumers, and make it seem like they're the ones to blame. In the book, I argue that actually for this kind of professional class, sort of middle class person that is really into the science, they also are quite materially secure and comfortable and have a level of consumption that they actually feel somewhat guilty about. I call it carbon guilt in the book. And so I actually say that this strategy of making it all about individual and their consumption actually appeals to professional middle class people who have this anxiety about their consumption. And then they are the ones that are really promoting this kind of moralistic politics about, we are the ones who have sinned. We must reduce, we must lower our carbon footprints. And so they promote this. And unfortunately, this kind of professional class moralistic politics really plays into the hands of big fossil capital, who's really got the power in this situation, and are very happy to see professionals blame themselves and all of us sort of focus on individual consumption.
Yeah, I was going to just say that I really appreciate what you're trying to do, which is centering this crisis with who has power and who profits. Because I think you're so right that is lost in this conversation, and that's to our detriment and to the benefit of those who actually are causing this crisis.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the way that I was just going to say that the way that it seems to me that you put the argument in your book is that there are two kind of threads that are pushing this individualistic idea of a carbon footprint, and those are the type of neoliberal ideology of individualism, personal responsibility, and all this, and then also the carbon guilt among the professional managerial class who do have a comparatively high standard of living, and they feel bad about it. And so, how do you feel like those kind of interact?
Well, it's quite interesting because you can kind of trace, if you look at the history of capitalism in the United States, you have this process of, one, you could see sort of the decline of the industrial working class, which we've all been bemoaning on the socialist left. You've had a process of deindustrialization where a lot of industrial factory work has either been automated or offshored, and you've had a lot of hollowing out of industrial working class communities. But at the same time, and of course, people have commented on how that process has really widened inequality in society as a whole. It sort of eroded this kind of middle class, industrial working class jobs that were an option for people with like high school educations, let's say in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, 1940s, 50s, and 60s. But alongside that process, you also have the massive expansion of higher education and in society. And what I argue is that as society is becoming more unequal, which is a product of this kind of neoliberal ideology that you mentioned before, professional class people are really trying to kind of use credentials or use degrees or use all sorts of, like credentials to carve out an advantage in this increasingly unequal labor market that's defined by the hollowing out of working class power and all that. And so these professionals, this professional class is really expanding at the same time society is moving towards this kind of neoliberal free market type of ideology. And also it's quite clear that professionals themselves respond to this kind of free market idea because education is so central to their kind of life class project. They really buy into these narratives of meritocracy and this idea that it's like up to individuals sort of studying hard and being smart and getting their credentials to succeed. And that success is a product of their own hard work. There's an incredible book that you all may have discussed or heard about by Lily Geismer, who shows how the Democratic Party in the 80s and 90s really shifted their base from working class people to these kind of suburban, affluent professionals who bought into a lot of neoliberal politics, this idea that we need to get more competitive, we need to be more meritocratic, means testing, things like that. All that kind of triangulation that the Clinton regime sort of pushed onto the Democratic Party really appealed to these affluent professional suburban people. And so that then became the base of the Democratic Party as they drifted away from their working class base, which is only just continuing decade after decade since then. So.
Right. And so, you've got this, the ideology and the carbon guilt is incorrectly, in your view and in our view, incorrectly identifying the problem. And so that is bringing them to a solution that is basically everybody has to live with less. And that has somehow not been super convincing. We're obviously, we can look around and we're not living in a world with high-speed rail and all electric cars and solar panels everywhere, So the politics of less has been less than convincing to working folks. Why do you think that is?
Right. So when the professionals are kind of in charge of environmental politics and they do have this kind of guilt about their own complicity, their own consumption, there's a kind of narcissism and that's kind of all about them. They've become quite, I try to argue in the book that there's even a kind of radical variant of this kind of professional class climate politics that I call it anti-system radicalism, and they kind of reject capitalism and industrialism as a whole. But their alternative is this sort of what some of your listeners may have heard of, this sort of vision of degrowth, or some of the slogans of degrowth are how to live better with less. And they really hone in on sort of aggregate reductions of energy consumption, and particularly in what they call the rich countries or the global north, which completely erases the fact that in a so-called rich country like the United States, there are huge proportions of people that are literally struggling to survive, barely meeting their basic needs. And so this politics of less extremely appeals to a small minority of the professional class, which if you go off statistics, one estimate, about 22% of the workforce are in these professional occupations. You can also just look at a very basic statistic that 63-ish% of Americans don't have a college degree. So I think one kind of prerequisite to most professional class occupations is that BA or that college degree. And that's already a minority of the population. And so you get a lot of these, they're in my field, like academics or people that work in NGOs or people that work in scientific think tanks or policy think tanks, and they're highly credentialed, and they really love this idea that we've reached an ecological crisis. We need to consume less. We need to sort of draw down, reduce society as a whole. And that makes sense to them because, again, they feel like they're already kind of a little too excessive in their own lives. They might drive a car, they might have to fly for professional conferences or something. So this idea of less really does appeal to them. But again, it's a minoritarian position that only appeals to other sort of middle class of relatively comfortable professionals. And again, when you look at the United States, where some stats say like 64% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, 2/3 of Americans struggle to pay for healthcare or worry about healthcare. About 1/3 of Americans even struggle to pay their utility bills. They're deciding between putting food on the table and paying their heat or their utility. So this politics of less, this idea that we need to live better with less, doesn't really appeal because for working class people, they're already living with less and they're struggling with less. And they need, obviously it's just basic sort of working class politics that capitalism really exploits the working class. It makes their life worse. It makes their life insecure. And that really we need a politics that offers more to them, that offers them more security and more power over the economic systems that control their lives. And this politics of less just has very little capacity to offer that to the masses of workers in our society.
Right. Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's definitely a big juxtaposition, seeing people talk about how we need to everybody has to make do with less, while, like you said, those statistics talking about 64% of people living paycheck to paycheck. It's really why do you think that they thought that this would be a good how does it even come into your head as a potentially good strategy?
I've been I don't want to go too far with this, but we know that, like, in this social media world we live in, that increasingly creates these kind of hermetically sealed sort of information bubbles where people kind of are all talking to the same types of people who sort of affirm and congratulate them on their views as being brilliant and correct. And so I've seen with these kinds of forms of professional class climate politics that, at least in social media, like, there's just so much of people just talking to themselves and affirming what they think that there becomes this kind of herd mentality of like, well, yes, this makes a lot of sense to us, so it must be a good idea for all of society. And there's no sort of reflexivity, no sort of self-critical sort of understanding that, hey, maybe we should be a little self-reflexive about that. We are sort of, again, people with college degrees are a third of society. Maybe we should start to think more about how this kind of crisis could yield a broader mass politics, but you just don't see that kind of reflection. You just see a lot of people saying the same stuff, and again, congratulating themselves about how brilliant they are. And to go to the other host's comment, there's very little reflection on that. We're not building the power to confront the people responsible for climate change, and climate change just keeps getting worse. And emissions keep going up, and despite the fact that we're not winning the struggle, we're not building the adequate mass movement, there's still this weird sort of self-satisfied consensus amongst these people that they think they have all the right ideas and all the right logical policy proposals. It's just society that's not coming along, and so. Unfortunately, I think in a lot of this space, there's ultimately a kind of contempt for the working class masses. This idea that these are just people that live go to malls and consume hamburgers, and ultimately, if you go back to the original kind of people who coined the idea of the professional managerial class, they're named Barbara and John Ehrenreich. They actually were very concerned about this in the 1960s and 1970s, where the so-called New Left was becoming inundated with these highly educated, highly idealistic political New Left people who started to really turn their nose up at the masses of working class people and had this kind of antagonistic contempt for the masses as being dupes, as being, again, consumer drones that just sort of go to the mall and don't think about things. So unfortunately, for decades now, we've kind of had this somewhat elitist clique in the left and in the professional class that really looks down on the masses. And I think, unfortunately, the climate politics that sort of feeds into that kind of contemptful politics toward the masses.
Yeah, I don't think that the stereotype of the liberal elite type of person comes from nothing. What was it that made you that kind of got your gears turning, so to speak? I think that I don't think that it would be inappropriate of me to say that, like, this is a class that I think that you probably belong to, that I belong to as a degree haver in an office job, a nice union job, working for the federal government, and you're working for a university, you have a degree, we're part of this class, but we're obviously not, that's not the, what was it that kind of brought you out of that or that kept you from getting into that mode of thought?
I think I was in it for many, many years, and it's kind of like you dig yourself a hole and you have to dig yourself out. I mean, I don't say it in the book, but the book is a kind of somewhat auto critique, because I definitely went through all these sort of ideologies myself, and I kind of had to shed them bit by bit. And it's really hard because I think this class position really makes these ideologies make a lot of sense. But I would say the turning point for many people on the left was really 2015 for me, for two reasons. The first being I had my first and only child, my daughter, who's now 6. And, it's 2015 and my daughter's born, and I'm looking at climate change getting worse. And I'm starting to think about what kind of world is going to exist for my daughter when she reaches retirement age in 2080. and how is the planet going to be safe for her? And then I started to see that, we were nearing the end of Obama's 2 terms as president, and virtually nothing had been done to address the climate crisis, despite all his lofty rhetoric about his belief in the realness of climate change. And that, in fact, one of the largest fossil fuel booms in US history happened during the Obama years. And so that made me pretty angry. And then I started to look more critically around me to see what sort of other professional climate policy wonky people were putting on the table. And it was a lot about, really wonky solutions like carbon taxes or carbon pricing that ultimately would, they claim, lead to the increase in the price of energy, which again is not something that a lot of working class people would welcome. And we saw in France, when Macron tried to, there was a big working class revolt. And then as I started to look more, I start to see all these like hyper radical climate activists that sort of want to like dismantle industrial civilization and start like local urban gardens as the solution. And that didn't seem like something that's going to be viable or appeal to the masses. So I started bit by bit to really becoming more critical. And talks I've been giving about the book, I say that my method is based on Karl Marx wrote an essay that it's actually a letter where he says we need a ruthless critique of everything existing. and this sort of ruthless critical outlook that Marx took toward everyone trying to build socialism in his time, he would eviscerate all his fellow socialists. So that I took inspiration from that. I think the climate movement is clearly losing. It's not building the power we need to win this fight. And so we do need a kind of ruthlessly critical approach towards it. And so that's around 2015, I started thinking that way. And then the other thing I should mention is around 2015, we started to finally see Bernie Sanders running for president and the revival of a kind of actually somewhat kind of mass socialist politics that was suddenly on the table again. So politics was suddenly on the table again. And we were, building movements that we thought might even be vying for state power in the heart of empire and building these. And so this idea of like, how do we build a mass politics? How do we build a sort of big majoritarian working class coalition with the Bernie campaigns was on the table as well. And then it just reinforced that like, clearly this kind of professional class climate politics is not it's not going to help build this kind of mass working class movement that Bernie and others were trying to build.
Right. And somebody mentioned in the chat that I'm not sure totally about the history of the terminology PMC. Somebody said that it came from James Burnham, an anti-Marxist conservative who sought to divide workers along arbitrary lines. Teachers and nurses are certainly working class. And I think that I don't think that you or I certainly wouldn't. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I would not characterize like workers with degrees who have, reasonable salaries as not working class class, but I simply notice that there is a distinction culturally in how they view themselves, people in this profession. It's something that I bump up against in my workplace as I talk to people about the union and things like they don't even conceptualize of themselves as workers, right? And even though they are, I think, in my view, they are workers, and they do need to organize, and they do have far more in common with, with a factory worker or or other maybe more stereotypical workers than they do with the boss, and as such they're part of the working class. And then also there's the trend of the proletarianization of the PMC, of the professional managerial class, among especially occupations like teaching and nursing. But so I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I would certainly not say that people who would be called PMC are not working class. It's just a flag there that, like, oh, these people are like, they occupy an interesting space, and there needs to be understanding about that.
Yeah, no, it didn't make for a good, I sort of, when I decided to write this book, I wanted to organize it by these three classes: the capitalist class, responsible; the professional class, who's sort of shaping climate politics; and the working class that can build a mass solution. But as I dove more deeply into these Marxist debates on class and who's part of the working class, it became clear to me that there's really a lot of very viable perspectives that would locate professionals in the broader working class. Because essentially, I think the broadest definition you can have is if you have to sell your labor power to survive on the market, you're working class. And for a lot of professional people, they are also could be living paycheck to paycheck, or at least, like, if they were fired, they wouldn't be able to survive for much longer than a couple months or something. And so there's definite, it's probably more accurate to talk about different strata within the working class. And I do think it's very clear that whether we like it or not, that education has become you can call it a cultural cleavage within the broader working class. This is just clear, not just in the United States, across the world. There's been, people like Thomas Piketty and David Shore, this political kind of pundit now, have been basically demonstrating empirically that you have this process of educational polarization amongst electorates, where you have the drift of sort of old industrial working class and other types of working class people without college educations are shifting to parties of the right, and educated populations are shifting towards parties that of the center or left that used to be parties of the working class. And so this process of educational polarization is actually real politically. You had in 2020 a lot of non-college educated Black, brown, working class people voting for Trump. And we all know that non-college educated white voters are a big base for him. So And I totally agree that we really need to think about different segments of the professional class. Some are quite secure, some are doing quite well, but there are these processes, as you said, of proletarianization, where there's an erosion of autonomy in the workplace for teachers, for nurses. There's an erosion of their security, and even their benefits and their salaries are being attacked from all these different bosses in the hospitals or in the college administrations or in school administrations. So yeah, and ultimately, I think one thing I want to make clear is that there's really nothing wrong with educated people or professional people doing politics or doing left politics or doing environmental politics or working class politics. And in fact, if you look at the history of the working class or socialist movements, I mean, they always have these strata, these intellectuals, these highly educated folks who shape these movements in the parties or in the unions. But the problem is if professional people are doing politics in a way that does not appeal to the working class and actually creates this kind of antagonistic outlook towards the working class, that's where you run into problems. And that's where we need to be more critical, right? So, but there's definitely a need to kind of create this broader working class coalition that includes these educated folks, for sure.
Yeah, so so we've gone through. There's been a lot of critique here, and I think that's pretty. I think that's pretty consistent with a Marxist tradition. But and just to lay it out, for folks on the radio, we're talking to Matthew Hubbard. He is a professor of geography.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. Professor of Geography in the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs at Syracuse University, talking about his book, Climate Change as Class War. And we've been talking about how, the environmental movement has basically centered around a politics of less, of saying that the way to fix climate change is you as a working person, all working people across the world, especially in rich countries, quote unquote, we're going to have to consume less. We simply have too much. And your book says that this isn't really the way to go. So what is the alternative to that? What is the alternative to that in the policies prescriptions? Like, how do we actually, what are the things that we can actually do to stop climate change, and how do we get there? As opposed to you point out that one of the Citizens Climate Lobby, their goal or their motto is to outsmart climate change, in a sort of technocratic sense.
Yeah.
And that doesn't seem like a very viable strategy. And even some of their prescriptions maybe, hit or miss. What would your strategy and your prescriptions be to fight climate change?
So, first, I'd say that if you look at if anyone's deploying class politics in the climate fight, it's actually the right, and it's like the fossil fuel industry and the Koch brothers, because they will, whenever they talk about climate policy, they say it's going to cost jobs, it's going to make your life cost more, it's going to raise your cost of living, and so they really, liberals like to focus on their denial of the science, but their more consistent message is that climate policy will make your life worse. And when climate liberals do advocate things like carbon taxes and making energy costs more, it's hard to blame the masses for believing these right-wing people.
Yeah.
So
if the right-wing people are just repeating what the climate liberals are saying,
Exactly. It's really unbelievable. So what I say is, and I was lucky to write this book when this kind of big excitement around a Green New Deal came around, because what I would say is that if you look at working class people's lives and what they are having trouble affording, which are things like I said before, like energy and food and housing more than ever these days, all these things are part of the sectors that we actually need to rapidly decarbonize, right? Energy, housing, transportation, right? All these things that workers rely on day in, day out. So our politics really should not be about how you need to, consume less of all this stuff, but it could actually be about giving working class people more secure access, green public housing, or, when AOC released the original Green New Deal document, she talked about a jobs guarantee where everyone had, family sustaining incomes, but also she talked about Medicare for all. It's like, people got mad at the Green New Deal for including healthcare, but the Green New Deal was really about saying there are two crises we're facing: inequality and climate change, and we can attack them both by this kind of big public goods oriented project that delivers material gains to the masses of working class people. So I think that's one plank of a working class strategy, really just try to build universal public goods, whether it be a job guarantee or, in my socialist dream, like sort of decommodified electricity as a human right. By the way, you guys are in the Tennessee Valley Authority. The original Tennessee Valley Authority had a slogan, electricity for all, which is, I think, a really a slogan we use a lot today for healthcare. And in fact, the Sunrise Movement, when they sat in on Nancy Pelosi's office for a Green New Deal, they had signs that said green jobs for all. So this idea of delivering material gains for all, I think, is really something we can't lose sight of. We lost the Green New Deal presidential battle and Biden won, and he has not really subscribed to this kind of public goods approach. So that's kind of off the table for now, but hopefully the political winds will shift where we could build enough power where it could be on the table again. And to build that power, I think we can't just rely on electoral shortcuts, as Jane McAlevey would say, of winning the presidency with Bernie Sanders. We have to go back to basics and build actually working class institutions that really are embedded in communities and people's lives. So that's as you all know, that's the labor movement, that's the union movement. So it's really exciting to see all this sort of, I loved how you had Jonah Furman's newsletter at the top of this show, the strikes that are happening, but also the massive increase in union drives and union elections, whether it be Amazon or Starbucks. But what I argue in the book is that we really can't ignore that this climate struggle is about energy, and ultimately climate energy experts agree that the pathway to decarbonization goes through the electric sector, electricity. We have to clean up electricity so that we're generating all our electricity from clean sources, whether it be solar, wind, hydroelectricity, or nuclear. And then we have to electrify all these things that we don't rely on electricity for, like our cars and transportation, or like the heat for our buildings. And if we can clean up electricity, electrify everything, that's the path. So what I argue in the book is that the electric utility sector is already one of the more unionized sectors in our economy. It's 25% union density. It's represented by unions like the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, the Utility Workers Union of America. And so these unions already have a base of power, of organized members. And to be fair, these unions can be quite conservative. They can be quite aligned with the bosses, if you will, in this kind of business unionist tradition. But ultimately, if we're a climate movement, we want to transform electricity, we cannot ignore these unions. We have to put them at not only a seat at the table, but they need to be a driver's seat of sort of shaping our policy frameworks, shaping our strategies. But I think the climate movement can also make a case to these unions that if they aren't getting more organized and proactive about putting themselves at the center of a green energy transition, they're actually threatened. Their members are threatened. Their unions are threatened by what I would call a kind of cutthroat green renewable capitalism that right now the renewable energy industry is pretty anti-union. A lot of renewable energy projects rely on a really insecure transient workforce and they're hostile towards unions. And also, by the way, a lot of renewable energy projects in the United States are funded by Wall Street, by some of the richest people who take advantage of these tax credits that are used to finance renewable projects. So this kind of Wall Street anti-union regime is trying to push through this kind of green capitalism that really threatens these unions in the electric sector. So we have to kind of organize with these unions to really for their own survival. And I think we can make that case to them. But the other thing is, I think we just can't ignore these unions. I've worked with a lot of what are called climate justice organizations, or people that are trying to build like public power campaigns. And they're always able to get like teachers unions and nurses unions on board, what I would call low carbon unions. And that's great. We need to build solidarity with these kind of low carbon unions, but we're not gonna be able to win this struggle unless we can build real coalitions with the unions that are at the heart of the struggle in energy and electricity. And I would also just include the building trades more broadly, which are notoriously conservative. But if we're going to solve climate change, it's going to mean building a whole lot of stuff, a whole lot of new infrastructure. And so we're going to have to figure out how to win over some of these building trade unions at the core of this fight. And so, and I think given the Green New Deal is kind of off the table, that there's really nowhere else to go for this kind of strategy is to rebuild the labor movement and union movement. And that's where we got to go right now.
Yeah, and you mentioned, or contrary to that being kind of a utopian vision of social change, I think that you contend that this is actually, no shortcuts, but this is the closest thing to a shortcut, is that we've got to revitalize the labor movement, particularly the labor movement in the electricity sector. And you a line that I really liked from your book was something about, your students always ask you how they can fight climate change, and most of the common answers are, reduce your carbon footprint, buy an electric car, or something like that, and you say join a union, and that's cool as hell. And but I mean, it's true, right? The IBEW has a huge and there we've got 2 IBEW locals that sponsor the show, and they're leaders in those unions listen to the program. I don't think that they're as involved in like the TVA stuff. It's mostly kind of more electricity building stuff, but I mean, these are the people that are going to be that are at the center of this kind of stuff, and so these are the folks that if anybody's going to be able to lead us out of it, it's going to be them. And unions have done stuff like this before. You talked in the book about Mazaki's fight with the Oil, Chemical, Atomic Workers Union to pass OSHA, and the IBEW's fight against deregulation as sort of case studies of unions leading legislative changes. Can you talk to us about those historical instances?
Yeah, thanks. It's so exciting to talk about this. The thing when you start to learn about this history is you just, even in the wake of all these attacks on unions, we have to realize unions are still extremely powerful. Like, they still have incredible resources where they can do things like sponsor radio programs. What these case studies show me is that when the unions deploy their resources in a broad-based campaign, they can build this mass base for a type of politics they're trying to build. So in the case of Tony Mazaki, his union members were working in extremely toxic chemical factories, oil refineries, chemical production facilities. And he was noticing these workers were getting sick. They were getting cancer. They were being exposed to really toxic stuff. And what he decided is that the union really needed to, and he clearly understood they're getting sick because the bosses are not willing to invest in safety precautions, and that we need to fight them. And so what he decided to do is actually bring some scientists, talk about believed science. He brought some scientific experts on toxic exposure, and he brought them on tour. He would go union local to union local all across the country to try to educate the workers about the risks that they were facing in these factories, and frankly, to get them kind of fired up and angry about what the bosses are doing to their health. And he succeeded, by building this sort of broad base within each union local. He, got these workers to flood Congress with letters about the need for something like the Occupational Health and Safety Administration. But he also got workers to testify in congressional hearings. But he also got these workers to tell their family members, their community members. And Tony was clear, like he always would say, we have enough lobbyists in Washington that are trying to pass union-friendly legislation. What we need is to build a mass base. And so what he did is deployed the union's resources to just launch this nationwide campaign that built step by step, local by local, this mass base. And, they got Richard Nixon to sign off on OSHA, not exactly a union friendly left winger. So that was incredible. And then fast forward into the 90s, there was this incredible effort to deregulate the electricity sector, which there's a lot we could talk about, but unions, particularly the IBEW, saw that as a threat to not only their members and their wages, and it might lead to shutdowns of power plants where they have a lot of good union jobs. They also saw it as a threat to really the reliability of the grid and the secure. And that's another thing. These workers take pride in really delivering this vital service to people, to hospitals, and so they saw this deregulation as something that's going to make the electric grid more insecure, and so they said, we got to fight for this to so that we can continue to deliver this service. And little did they know, they really launched this fight in the 90s. They sent out an organizing binder to every union local and sort of gave them strategies. And again, all these resources they can deploy. Strategies like, how to write a letter to the editor about this issue, how to do a press conference about it. And then they did this organizing in the 1990s. And then famously, you had this wave of blackouts in California. I think it was 2001, which everyone was clear was basically because of regulation in California. And so that kind of, in addition to all this union organizing, really put a lot of cold water on all this deregulation. And so, again, when unions kind of deploy their resources, their substantial resources to these types of campaigns, they can win because they still have power bases, they still have institutional resources to deploy. And so I think, again, if we could imagine the unions doing this in a sort of campaign for a green energy transition that is not advantaging the renewable capitalists, but that advantages unions, that could be another example of how to marshal union resources for this kind of nationwide campaign.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And reading that, I knew about Mazzocchi. I think that he as a case study is a lot more well known among kind of labor left activists, but that was really I really enjoyed reading about that IBEW campaign against deregulation. That was I've got it on my list to try to find out some more about that and maybe see if we can talk to some people about that. And Les Leopold, who's the author of the biographer for Tony Mazzocchi, he is definitely somebody that I want to get on the program at some point. So I think that your book does a really good job of laying out some of the issues with the climate movement today and talking about ways forward and looking to history for the way forward. And I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great. I would highly recommend people buy it. Adam, did you have anything else that you wanted to ask?
No, I just wanted to see if there's maybe anything that we've left out so far in the conversation that you really wanted to, share with our listeners.
Let's see. The one thing I was wanting to get in there is that the Tennessee Valley Authority, by the way, is we just wrote I wrote an article with Fred Stafford and Jacobin where we discovered that it's 60% unionized, right? So I mean, like, that's a level of union density you don't see about anywhere. And so, and in our article, what we point out is that there's a lot of these green NGO types that want to shift all to renewables and want to shift to like community energy. They're actually become quite critical of the TVA, and some of them have even advocated breaking it up. In fact, Obama had thrown the idea around of privatizing the TVA. So that's disastrous. If you want a model of kind of a big public power that I think they have something like 14 million customers, 60% union density. And actually they just announced a research partnership, I think with maybe Oak Ridge Laboratory, where they're exploring research into all kind of cutting edge new low carbon technology, some of it in the nuclear realm, but some of it in the kind of green hydrogen realm. And so they're exploring like cutting edge technologies. And so whereas a lot of the green left kind of thinks we're going to have just like small scale renewables in localities spread across the landscape, I think TVA represents this kind of, it represents something at the scale of the crisis we face, a massive federally owned public power utility that could expand. And in fact, Bernie Sanders, he took this from the People's Policy Project, like this idea that if we want to solve climate change, we need something like a green TVA that could massively expand clean energy production all across the country. And so I think that kind of
that
model
provides a really good product, a cheap product, reliable, and is already much more clean energy than others. The percentage of hydro and nuclear energy that the TVA uses is when you combine both of those, it's something like 60%, and only like 39% of it is fossil fuels. So it's a real and the price is much cheaper. Like if you move south into the more southern parts of Alabama, their utility bills are much higher. They have to deal with Alabama Power and another sponsor of the program, Energy Alabama. They're constantly having fights with with Alabama Power, and they're insanely high rates on customers. It's the difference is marked, I think, and you get people. I think that people are very satisfied with the service that they get from the TVA, and it's a product that I think that more than some would be easy to expand.
Yeah, and I mean, in its origins in the 30s, that was maybe their number one goal, was not only delivering power to rural areas that didn't have it, but also delivering cheaper power. They really wanted to deliver the cheapest power possible. And that vision, again, is completely lost. Like most climate advocates, again, think we should be paying more for energy to kind of internalize the emissions. But this vision of more and cheaper, clean power, right? If it's clean, I don't think, for at least from the climate perspective, we don't need to worry about more consumption of it, right? So, this vision of giving cheaper power is something the climate movement could learn tons from, and that's why people love the TVA in that region. So,
yeah. Matt, thank you so much for your time. We went a little long, but I think it was good. I enjoyed it, just as I enjoyed the book, which is Climate Change as Class War. Matthew Huber is the author. You can buy it on Powell's. If you use the union's link, 7.5% of your purchase will go to the ILWU Local 5's Strike Fund, which is the union that represents workers at Powell's Books. Matthew, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. It was fun.
Yep. You just saw
All right, y'all. Thanks for joining. Appreciate your time this morning. We're going to wrap things up. I did forget a PSA from earlier in the show. I meant to read this earlier. I forgot it, and I wanted to make sure we got it recorded this week. And that is from the League of Women Voters of Alabama. I saw this message come across my inbox this week and wanted to amplify this message. League of Women Voters of Alabama is urging you to contact your state representative now to urge opposition to House Bill 209. The bill was presented to the Alabama House Constitution Campaign and Elections Committee on Wednesday, April 19th. This bill would criminalize providing absentee voting assistance. You can use the League's HB 209 talking points as input for your own powerful message to your state representative. So if you find the League of Women Voters of Alabama online, on their website or online on social media, I know they have a Facebook page. You can find this information. They share the links to easily find your Alabama legislators. So the hearing was this past week. There are 42 Alabama House representatives who have come together to co-sponsor this anti-democratic legislation, which, quote, would prohibit any person from distributing, ordering, requesting, collecting, completing, obtaining, or delivering an absentee ballot application or absentee ballot of another person in certain circumstances. It would provide for exceptions. This bill would prohibit any person from receiving a payment or providing a payment to another person for distributing, ordering, requesting, collecting, completing, obtaining, or delivering an absentee ballot application or absentee ballot of another person in certain circumstances. This bill would also establish criminal penalties for violations. If HB 209 passes, individuals who help a voter participate in the absentee voting process would be prosecuted and convicted of a Class D felony. According to the League, HB 209 will incite fear and confusion for vulnerable and underserved voters who have in the past obtained information and assistance from trusted, nonprofit, nonpartisan organizations such as the League of Women Voters. If HB 209 passes, voting rights groups, churches, and other nonprofit volunteer organizations would be prohibited from providing nonpartisan free assistance to voters with the absentee ballot request process. It would also criminalize individuals who are working to increase voter participation. The League of Women Voters of Alabama strongly opposes HB 209 and asks your assistance in defeating it. You can read more about this bill and how to get involved at lwval.org. And I also want to point you to a recent article by Patrick Darrington called Voting Rights Advocates Are Organizing Against New Voter Suppression Bill. Advocates also say the bill likely violates the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 208 of the Voting Rights Act. And that is published by the Alabama Political Reporter. So that's all I have for you folks. Really appreciate your time today. Hope you enjoyed today's main show where we hosted the conversation between Rutgers and the University of Alabama campus workers. and I hope you enjoyed hearing from Warren Tidwell about disaster relief in Camp Hill, Alabama. Overtime was Earth Day themed, and really enjoyed that. So without further ado, hope to see y'all at the Labor Council Barbecue this weekend, today until 4 o'clock p.m. All power to the workers. Have a good weekend, y'all.
Thank you.